Chapter 272. I say, Prince, do you want to go up and protect the Emperor? Yili looked teasingly at Mo Xiaoyao as she asked softly. Mo Xiaoyao raised his brows and smiled. If I go over now, the Emperor won't think I want to protect the Emperor. He'll think I want to assassinate the Emperor. Yili tilted her head and looked in Mo Jingqi's direction, shaking her head disinterestedly. It was said that the Emperor was a person who was both civil and military. How afraid of death did he have to be to have all the guards upstairs surround him? While keeping an eye on the assassins, he was also keeping an eye on them. It wasn't just Mo Xiaoyao. Right now, anyone related to the Prince Ding mansion would be treated as an assassin. Oh, in such a chaotic place, it's not good for the prince and princess to be so relaxed, right? Not far away, Yilu Yi was easily dealing with the assassins. He even had time to speak to Mo Xiaoyao and Yili with a smile. Mo Xiaoyao smiled faintly. If we can't even deal with a few assassins, what's the use of the palace guards? Yilu Yi laughed loudly. Prince is right. A few small thieves aren't worth Prince Ding personally dealing with. Prince Yilu, please move to the side. The assassins have all been attracted by you. And San, who was standing in front of Yili, casually dealt with an assassin as he spoke expressionlessly. Yilu Yi raised his brows. His gaze paused on the man who had fallen in front of San. He smiled and said, Sorry, I don't know why these assassins always like to bother I. The guards of the Prince Ding mansion are indeed skilled. The man who had fallen to the ground didn't have a single wound on his body. There was only a very thin wound on his neck. There wasn't even much blood flowing out. However, the assassin didn't even struggle before he fell to the ground and died. Even a professional assassin might not be able to do this better. The man in front of him was only wearing the clothes of an ordinary guard, but he appeared to be completely relaxed and calm in the chaotic crowd. Watching the chaotic battle, Yili raised her eyebrows and asked in a low voice, The assassin is here for Yilu Yi. A large portion of these assassins had come for Yilu Yi. This could be because Yilu Yi appeared to be the strongest, but Yilu Yi's attire was completely different from that of the Dechu state. It was impossible for these assassins not to recognize him. Mo Xiaoyao stared at the handsome man who kept inching closer to them and said, It might have something to do with him, but the assassins are all from the Central Plains. No matter if it was Yilu Yi or Yilu Hong, they would not send the northern tribes people to cause trouble in the palace. Yilu Yi purposely led the assassins here to test your strength. Mo Xiaoyao's strength was well known throughout the world, there was no need to rely on a few assassins to test his strength. Of course, Yilu Yi could not rely on a few assassins to kill him, so he could only do it for Yili who was sitting beside him. Yili smiled and said, Do I need to make a move in this kind of situation? And San in front softly replied, Of course not. It's just a few assassins. If Wang Fei needs to personally make a move, doesn't that mean that this subordinate's existence is useless? Yili raised her eyes to look at San and said with a smile, You are now Wang Fei's left and right hand, not a shadow guard. Can I trouble you not to rush to the front lines? Hearing this, San's face immediately fell. He still liked the days of being a shadow guard. If an enemy came, he would just rush up and beat them to a pulp. Unlike now, he had to wait for the shadow guards to slip through the net before it was his turn. It just so happened that the shadow guards of the Ding Prince's residence were very qualified. Basically, there would not be any fish that would slip through the net. Mo Xiaoyao smiled and said, I feel that he is not trying to test Li's martial arts, but rather Wang Li's courage. Hearing Mo Xiaoyao's words, Yili was silent for a long time before leisurely replying, Marrying into the Ding Prince's residence, could it be that this still does not prove Wang Fei's courage? If it were any other girl who had just been annulled by the Prince of Li and then betrothed to Prince Ding, they might as well hang themselves with a piece of white silk. The fact that she was still alive was enough to prove that her courage was not small, okay? Not far away, a child's cry could be heard. Princess Changel stared blankly for a moment before suddenly crying out, It's Zhening. Princess Ding. Sitting to the side, Mo Xiaoyao waved his hand. Two shadow guards withdrew from the battlefield without leaving a trace, quickly flying towards the source of the cry. Yili looked at noble consort Lu, who was sitting by the emperor's side, and wrinkled her brows. Even they had heard Princess Jinning's cry. She did not believe that noble consort Lu had not heard it. However, noble consort Lu's expression remained as calm as usual. Even the empress frowned as she glanced in that direction. As the birth mother, she acted as if she had not heard anything. In the past, she only felt that noble consort Lu's temperament was cold and untainted. However, looking at her now, she could not help but feel a chill in her heart. A woman who did not even care about the safety of her own daughter, what exactly was she thinking in her heart? Surrounded by layers of imperial bodyguards, the empress calmly said a few words to Mo Jingqi. Mo Jingqi raised his head and looked in their direction. Seeing Mo Xiaoyao and Yili sitting calmly to the side, his eyes darkened. In a clear voice, he said, "Prince Ding, I'll have to trouble you to bring our second princess back." Mo Xiaoyao smiled faintly. He stood up and smiled at Yili before flying out of the building. With Mo Xiaoyao's status, it was fine for him to sit and not do anything. However, if the emperor personally ordered him not to do anything, then it would be inexcusable. The empress clearly did not expect that Mo Xiaoyao would ask Mo Xiaoyao to go save the princess. She stared blankly in the direction of Yili, frowning with worry. First, she had to worry about Princess Ding. Her daughter was still young. If Prince Ding was not there to protect her, how could she be at ease? Glancing at noble consort Lu, who was sitting calmly on the side, the empress's face darkened for the first time. Zhen Ning was taken away by the assassins. Noble consort Lu, aren't you worried at all? Noble consort Lu calmly withdrew her gaze from the outside of the building and said indifferently, "There are so many imperial bodyguards in the palace. Of course, they will bring Zhen Ning back safely. Your Majesty, I'm sorry for making you worry." The empress was so angry that she felt suffocated. She snorted coldly and did not speak anymore. She just kept watching Yili and Chang'e over there. With the emperor's temper, he would never allow her to send someone to bring Chang'e over, even if the one in the chaos was his own daughter. As soon as Mo Xiaoyao left, the besieging assassins became fiercer. Obviously, these assassins were afraid that Mo Xiaoyao had not done anything yet, so they did not use their full strength. Now that Mo Xiaoyao was no longer present, they naturally had to take advantage of the time before he returned to finish off the enemies in front of them. A black-clothed assassin was thrown to the side of Yili's feet. Princess Chang'e, who had a sinister expression on her face, could not help but shriek. Yili frowned. Rising, she ordered, "An heir, Qinghuan, take 2 people to protect Princess Chang'e." An heir looked at Yili with disapproval. Princess Chang'e tightly gripped Yili's clothes, unwilling to let go. Although she was still young, having grown up in the palace, Princess Chang'e's intuition was superior to that of ordinary people. Being by Princess Ding's side made her feel extremely at ease. Yili pulled her hand away, softly saying, "Good child. It is very dangerous to be by my side. Follow the 2 of them to a safe place." Princess Chang'e blinked her eyes and gazed at her. "Princess Ding, come with me." Yili smiled faintly and shook her head. She swept a glance at Yeluyi, who was fighting skillfully. So long as she moved, Yeluyi would definitely draw the assassins towards her. Since this was the case, it was better to stand here and deal with any changes by remaining unchanged. The princess must be obedient. Do not let your imperial mother worry, understand? Princess Chang'e hesitantly glanced at the nearby empress, who was nervously watching her. In the end, she obediently nodded her head. Chapter 273. In the midst of the fight, Yeluyi turned back to glance at Yili, who was still standing not far away. He raised his brows and smiled, "Princess is indeed brave." Yili leaned against the pillar, calmly saying, "If Prince Yelu didn't lead them here, I would be happier. Actually, right now I'm so scared my legs can't move." Having his intentions exposed, Yeluyi didn't feel embarrassed at all. He smiled and said, "Princess Consort found out. Actually, This one only wanted to be a hero saving a beauty. I believe Princess won't blame this one, right? Hearing this, San raised his brows. He grabbed an assassin with one hand and thrust it forward. The bright light of the blade pierced towards Yeluyi. Hearing the wind, Yeluyi nimbly turned around and kicked the assassin who had lost control. This one, be careful. San expressionlessly raised his hand, apologizing without sincerity. It was a slip of the hand. Prince, please forgive me. Yeluyi raised his brows, smiling. Princess indeed has many capable people by her side. Of course, I won't blame you. Yeluyi. Go die. It seemed that this casual fight had finally hurt the assassin's pride. With a loud roar, several black-clothed men threw themselves at Yeluyi. Their attacks were so fierce that it made one's heart tremble. Yeluyi finally began to gather his energy to deal with them. Yili leaned against the pillar, looking at the chaos around them. She gave Imo Jingqi, who was surrounded by guards, a high degree of disdain. His subjects were being slaughtered by assassins. As the monarch, half of his guards didn't move. He refused to let them leave his side to deal with the assassins. She even said that Imo Jingqi was good at controlling people's hearts. Now, it seemed that in the face of life and death, he had forgotten everything. Even though it wasn't a life and death situation yet. With a few clear sounds, several more black-clothed men rushed into the building. Yili couldn't help but frown. The palace was heavily guarded. How capable were these assassins to be able to infiltrate the palace on such a large scale? And the palace guards. It had been almost 15 minutes, but not a single guard had arrived. Faintly feeling that something was wrong, Yili began to move out of the building without leaving a trace. There was a strange sound in the air. Yili narrowed her eyes and said sternly, "Let's go. They want to set fire to the building." Just as he finished speaking, an heir, who was in the corner, had already grabbed Princess Changel and flew out. Behind them, Qingluan nodded to Yili and followed them out. And San, who was beside Yili, beat back an assassin with a palm. He grabbed Yili and jumped out of Zhai Xinglu amidst the rain of arrows. Yili found a place to hide and steadied herself. When she turned around, the first and second floors of Zhai Xinglu were already on fire. Apparently, there were some fire arrows among the arrows, and Yili smelled some fuel from upstairs. Moreover, it was the beginning of June. Zhai Xinglu was made of wood and paint, so it was easy to set fire. Everyone was on the third floor. Once the fire started, the already chaotic Zhai Xinglu was filled with endless screams and cries for help. And San, save them. Wang Fei, we didn't bring many people into the palace. And San frowned. Yili said in a low voice, "Don't worry about me. Save them first." Today, those who had the qualifications to ascend Zhai Xinglu were all important officials of the court. Not to mention more than half dead, even a few injured would be troublesome. Helpless, and San could only wave his hand for the shadow guards who had followed behind to go upstairs and save them. Very quickly, Imo Jingqi and the other imperial concubines were all rescued by the guards. The guards who had originally surrounded Imo Jingqi and had no place to fight immediately faced the assassins outside. In the darkness, no one knew how many assassins there were. The imperial concubines, princes, and princesses of high status were still fine, as they had people protecting them. As for the imperial concubines who were not ranked in the rankings, no one would care if they died. Upon landing, the empress looked all around. With great difficulty, she finally saw Yili. Without caring for anything else, she hurriedly ran over. "Wang Fei. Changel." Yili said, "Wang Fei, there is no need to worry. Princess Changel has already been sent to a safe place." The empress let out a breath, smiling faintly. "Thank you, be careful." Yili pulled the empress away, pushing her towards the guards who had followed over. Tilting her head, she dodged the incoming blade and nimbly slipped past the assassin's side. The assassin, who had originally been determined to succeed, only felt a chill in his chest. Dazedly lowering his head, he saw blood spurt out from his chest. Yili turned her head and said to the guards, "Take Her Highness the Empress to a safe place." The phoenix embroidered on the Empress's clothes was too dazzling. She had only just landed when 2 arrows greeted her. After instructing the guards, Yili's hand flashed and she once again melded into the darkness. Her eyes calmly stared at everything in front of her. Princess Ding is indeed nimble. This humble prince admires you. A voice sounded from beside her, carrying a trace of ridicule. Yili narrowed her eyes, elbowing the person who had suddenly appeared beside her. The person who had come was clearly not an easy person to deal with. He raised his hand, intending to grab her arm. Yili's lips hooked into a cold smile. She quickly pulled out a dagger from her sleeve and slashed it towards the person who had come. The person who had come snorted and dodged to the side. In the blink of an eye, Yili had already sent out a flying kick. She could clearly see that the person in front of her was Yellow Yi, who had run off to who knew where in the chaos. Yellow Yi raised his hand to block, but then let go because Yili's dagger was already a bayonet. Yellow Yi turned around and helplessly said with a smile, "Princess Ding, the enemy is right in front of us. Are we still going to have internal strife?" He had seen many women who knew martial arts. The women of the northern tribes, regardless of age, all knew a few moves. But this was the first time he had seen a woman with such fierce moves. Compared to a specially trained assassin, she was not inferior. Yellow Yi finally confirmed that now was not a good time to provoke her. If they fought and someone else took advantage of the situation, then it would really be trying to steal a chicken only to end up losing the rice used to lure it. Yili flew to the side and looked coldly at him as she said, "Internal strife?" Prince Yellow used the wrong words. It must be that you are not used to the language of the Dechu state. Yellow Yi rubbed his nose and said with a smile, "At least we are on the same side now, aren't we? This one only wanted to protect Princess. Now it seems that there is no need." Yili looked at him with a fake smile and said, "There is no need to protect me. Prince Yellow should stay further away from me. Be careful not to injure others." Yellow Yi watched as Yili accurately used a dagger to cut the neck of a person who had tried to sneak attack her. He couldn't help but feel a chill run down his neck. This was the princess consort of the Dechu state's Ding country. She really was as vicious as the legendary Prince Ding. But, only this kind of woman was interesting. Protect the emperor. The imperial guards of the palace finally arrived. The large group of imperial guards rushed in and caused the originally dark situation to lose their advantage. Yili turned back to look at the one-sided situation. She did not hesitate to turn and head deeper into the palace. Yellow Yi, who had been staring at her, rubbed his chin and followed with interest. Yili quickly shuttled through the gloomy palace, as if she had walked through the palace thousands of times before and was familiar with the layout of the palace. The slender figure nimbly landed under the eaves of a palace. Yili stopped in her tracks and raised her head to look at the eaves behind her. She said lightly, "Prince Yellow, why are you following Ben Fei at this time?" Having been discovered, Yellow Yi didn't dawdle and jumped down from the roof. He said with a smile, "Is Princess going to find Prince Ding? Do you know where Prince Ding is?" Yili said lightly, "This doesn't seem to have anything to do with Prince Yellow. If Prince Yellow has the time to think about this, why don't you think about how to explain why you started assassinating people when you just arrived in the Dechu state?" Chapter 274. Just now at Zhai Xinglu, the assassin had directly called out Yellow Ye's name. At that time, many people had heard it. Not many people knew about the assassination at the Lantern Festival, but it did not mean that it would not spread. If there were any important casualties tonight, those noble families would most likely place the blame on Yellow Yi. Yellow Yi said innocently, "This one has come from afar. Who knew that the Dechu state is more dangerous than our northern tribes?" Yili sneered, "I think that compared to the northern tribes, Prince Yellow is more like someone from our Dechu state." Finishing, she did not care about Yellow Ye's expression and turned to quickly walk forward. The two of them, one in front and one behind, walked a short distance in the imperial palace. Probably because of the assassin, most of the guards had gone to Zhai Xinglu. At this time, the imperial palace was not as strict as usual. Yili frowned as she walked. If someone were to sneak into the palace at this time, the consequences would be unthinkable. Yeluyi leisurely followed behind Yili. He could see that Princess Ding was not aimlessly searching the palace, but was going in a certain direction. But with his eyesight, he could not find any traces of Mo Xiaoyao. After thinking for a long time, he could only conclude that it was a secret mark of the Ding Palace that he did not know about. Very quickly, the two of them reached the peach forest at the edge of the imperial garden. Yeluyi frowned. Wang Fei, are you sure you didn't find the wrong place? Yili jumped over the river in front of her and said calmly, I did not ask Prince to follow. When her feet touched the ground, Yili did not hesitate to enter the peach forest. Yeluyi shrugged and followed with a smile. Wang Fei is not worried about this one. Are you not afraid that I will follow behind you and sneak attack? You can try. Yeluyi rubbed his nose and was speechless. Although he was not timid, he was not someone who liked to seek death. Not to mention Princess Ding's strength, he had vaguely sensed that someone was following them the moment they entered the imperial garden. It would have been fine if that was all, but he was still unable to determine who the person following them was. It was purely because of his intuition that he had escaped death countless times since he was young. Since Princess Ding had said so, Yi Luixi knew that the people following them must be from the Prince Ding mansion. He could not help but hate the strength of the Prince Ding mansion. The palace was in a complete mess, but Yeluyi dared to guarantee that even the most inconspicuous guard in the Prince Ding mansion did not feel the slightest bit of panic. Not long after Yeluyi entered the forest, he heard voices coming from afar. However, it didn't sound like a fight. Instead, it sounded like a woman arguing about something. Looking at Yili, whose expression he couldn't see clearly, Yeluyi laughed in amusement. Following this woman was indeed the right choice. In the peach blossom forest, Princess Jinning sat on the ground, staring blankly at her mother, who was completely different from usual. Earlier, she had been frightened. She clearly wanted to throw herself into her mother's arms and cry, but she could only sit on the ground in a daze, not even daring to cry out loud. Because her mother did not even look at her. Although she was still young, she was extremely sensitive and knew that her mother did not want her to disturb her. Mo Xiaoyao looked at the white-clothed woman in front of him and could not help but frown. Since Princess Jinning is fine, I will take my leave. Not long after chasing out of Zhai Xinglu, he discovered that the assassins who had kidnapped Princess Jinning had no intention of harming her. They only wanted to draw him away. However, Mo Xiaoyao did not expect that the kidnappers were arranged by the woman in front of him. She actually predicted that Mo Jingqi would ask him to save Princess Jinning. It seemed that he had underestimated noble consort Lu's influence on Mo Jingqi. Do you hate me that much? Noble consort Lu said faintly. Her usually cold and indifferent voice had a hint of hidden bitterness in it. Mo Xiaoyao frowned and turned to look at noble consort Lu. I don't hate you or not. Hearing this, noble consort Lu's face paled. She gently bit her red lips, unable to speak. This answer was actually more rewarding than pure hate. In Mo Xiaoyao's eyes, she did not even have the right to make him hate her, because there was no relationship between them to begin with. Why do you treat me like this? Noble consort Lu asked in a trembling voice. Her cold face had a hint of fragility and sadness. Compared to her usual high and mighty appearance, she had a hint of gentleness and helplessness. She raised her head to look at Mo Xiaoyao and asked unwillingly, why do you never look at me? In the past, it was Su Zuidi. Now, it's Yili. I've never been worse than them. Xiaoyao, why don't you look at me? Whether it was family background, appearance, or talent, she had never lost to anyone. Even if it was Su Zuidi, who was the most beautiful woman in the world, she had never felt that she was more beautiful than her. However, ever since she was a teenager, this man whom she had fallen in love with at first sight had never been willing to look at her more than once. In the past, he only looked at Su Zuidi and smiled gently at her. He only accompanied her to play the zither, recite poems, and paint. He would never see her by his side. Originally, she thought that since Su Zuidi was no longer around, he would not treat anyone differently. But now, as a woman who wholeheartedly admired Imo Xiaoyao, she was more sensitive than anyone else. Imo Xiaoyao treated Yili even more differently than Su Zuidi. Imo Xiaoyao frowned with displeasure. He was not unaware of noble consort Lu's feelings for him. It was just that when he was young, he did not care at all. The second young master of the Ding Kingdom was the dream of many women in the capital. The number of women in the capital who secretly admired him was uncountable. Also, because of his mother and father, he would not pay attention to other women when he already had a fiancée. After noble consort Lu entered the palace, it was even more impossible for him to have any thoughts. No matter how much he hated Imo Jingqi, he would not stoop so low as to seduce his concubine. So he completely could not understand noble consort Lu's grievances. Noble consort Lu, be careful with your words. My name is not something that anyone can call. Noble consort Lu gritted her teeth. Why are you never willing to look at me? Am I really not as good as your eyes? Imo Xiaoyao frowned. I advise you to respect your identity. I can give up the identity of noble consort. Noble consort Lu raised her voice and cried. Do you think I like being noble consort? None of this is what I want. As long as you, I can give up everything. Imo Xiaoyao frowned as he looked at the woman in white who had clearly lost control. He turned to leave with an indifferent expression. Don't go. Noble consort Lu shouted and threw herself at Imo Xiaoyao, trying to grab his sleeve. However, although her martial arts were not weak, she was not on the same level as Imo Xiaoyao. Imo Xiaoyao did not intend to hurt her and only waved her away. Noble consort Lu's body swayed and finally fell to the ground. Don't go. Xiaoyao, I have something important to tell you. Imo Jingqi. Imo Jingqi has bad intentions towards the Prince Ding mansion. He wants to scheme against you. Imo Xiaoyao lowered his head to look at her and said indifferently, when has the emperor ever had good intentions towards the Prince Ding mansion? In the past, you protected Miss Li several times. Today, I saved Princess Zhen Ning as I returned the favor. Noble consort Lu, take care of yourself. Our emperor is not a magnanimous person. Chapter 275. Why, TSK, what an iron-hearted man. Noble consort Lu is a rare beauty. In a dark corner of the peach forest, Yi gloated by Yi Li's side. Yi Li glanced at him indifferently. She was surprised to see noble consort Lu here. When she came down from Zhai Xing Lu, noble consort Lu was still by Imo Jingqi's side. How did she escape and appear in the peach forest in such a short time? Noble consort Lu had long known about Imo Xiaoyao's feelings. She also knew about Imo Xiaoyao's feelings. So she wasn't angry to see them. She was just surprised by noble consort Lu's deep love for Imo Xiaoyao. Looking at Princess Zhen Ning, who was still sitting on the ground and not daring to speak, Yi Li secretly shook her head. It wasn't wrong to be deeply in love with a man, but it wasn't good to be careless about it. How careless did noble consort Lu have to be to tell her about her feelings for Imo Xiaoyao in front of her? Although Princess Zhen Ning was only 8 years old, in the imperial family, an 8-year-old child wasn't ignorant. What do you think, princess? Do you want to go out and take a look? Yi smiled. Look at how affectionate noble consort Lu is. Doesn't princess have any thoughts? What if Prince Ding is moved? Yi Li glanced at him disinterestedly. If the prince wants to sow discord, he should use a clever excuse. Did he think she was stupid to go out now? Right now, noble consort Lu was probably just sad. If she appeared in front of her again, noble consort Lu would probably hate her to the heavens. Of course, it didn't mean she didn't hate her now. Yi Li reminded herself to be careful of noble consort Lu in the future. She was clearly disfigured, but she was still able to recruit people. Obviously, she wasn't completely disfigured. Yi Li calculated silently in her heart. In the peach forest, Imo Xiaoyao felt a chill run down his spine. He glanced at noble consort Lu, who was crying like a pear blossom in the rain, and turned to leave without hesitation. Mo Xiaoyao walked out of the peach forest and stood by the riverside for a while before turning his head and saying with a smile, "Lili, since you're here, why aren't you coming out?" Yi Li strolled out from the peach forest and smiled faintly. "Isn't it because I don't want to ruin Prince's plans?" Mo Xiaoyao was silent for a while before he said, "I suddenly felt my heart skip a beat. Is Lili trying to ruin Ai's face again?" Yi Li glared at him fiercely. She would never admit that her thoughts had been guessed by him. Yellow Yi followed behind Yi Li and leisurely walked out. He looked at Mo Xiaoyao and said with a smile, "Prince Ding is truly extraordinary. This little prince admires you." Mo Xiaoyao calmly said, "Prince Yelu is too polite. I cannot compare to Prince Yelu." Before he finished, Mo Xiaoyao turned to look at the other side of the imperial garden. Yelu Yi said, "It seems that someone is looking for Prince Yelu." Yelu Yi looked over and saw several figures hurrying over. They were clearly the palace guards. It seemed that no matter how afraid Mo Jingqi was of death, he had not forgotten that there was an important guest present. Yelu Yi clicked his tongue and smiled brightly at Yi Li, saying, "I won't bother the palace guards. Princess Ding, let's meet again tomorrow." After speaking, he leaped into the peach forest and disappeared. This subordinate greets Prince, greets Princess. Several guards came over. When they saw Mo Xiaoyao and Yi Li standing side by side, they were stunned and hurried forward to greet them. Mo Xiaoyao nodded, "What are you doing?" The leader of the guard said, replying to Prince, "We discovered that Prince Yelu and Princess Ding had disappeared in the chaos. This subordinate has been ordered by the emperor to search everywhere." Mo Xiaoyao nodded, calmly saying, "Princess is worried about Ai, so she came over to take a look. Just send someone to report to His Majesty that Princess Consort is with Ben Wang. As for Prince Yelu, you can continue to search." The guards naturally did not dare to delay. After bidding farewell to the two, they went to report to Mo Jingqi and continued to search for Yelu Yi. Yi Li turned back to look at the peach forest, frowning, "Noble consort Lu." Mo Xiaoyao pulled Yi Li back, softly chuckling, "Noble consort Lu has nothing to do with this husband. Wife, don't wrongly accuse me." Yi Li rolled her eyes at him, saying, "Is it okay to leave noble consort Lu inside?" Mo Xiaoyao said, "Noble consort Lu is not as simple as you think. Do you think she can come here from Zhaixing Lu in such a short time with ordinary skills? If you have a good relationship with the Empress, it's best to remind her to be careful of noble consort Lu." Yi Li looked at Mo Xiaoyao strangely. Previously, he said he owed noble consort Lu a favor. Although he had just repaid it, he couldn't just turn his back on her, right? Mo Xiaoyao looked at her with a smile, saying, "Do you think that just because I accepted her, she would really leave with me without anything?" Yi Li raised her eyebrows. "Wasn't that the case?" Mo Xiaoyao said lightly, "How could an aristocratic family raise a woman who would do anything for love? If she really did not want anything like she said, how could she give birth to 2 sons and 1 daughter in a row and be the most favored in the harem? She doesn't really want to be with me. She just can't bear that I turned a blind eye to her in the past and now treat you so well." Yi Li frowned. She believed that noble consort Lu had true feelings for Mo Xiaoyao. At least, it was not completely with a purpose. Such a proud woman begged a man in such a situation when she knew the odds were not good. It was impossible that there was no sincerity and hope in her heart. However, no matter how sincere she was, it was useless. Mo Xiaoyao already belonged to her. She refused to let anyone else touch him. When they left the imperial garden, Mo Jingqi had already sent people to wait for them at the exit. With such a big thing happening in the palace, it was naturally impossible for them to leave so easily. Everyone went back to wash up and sleep. Although there were many assassins who infiltrated the palace this time, compared to the thousands of palace guards, it was just a drop in the ocean. The reason why they were able to create such a big scene was because they had the element of surprise. However, it could be seen that the palace guards were not as strict as imagined. It was no wonder that the shadow guard of the Prince Ding mansion secretly looked down on the palace guards. At least, no assassins had ever broken into the Prince Ding mansion in the past 100 years. After being frightened by the assassins, Mo Jingqi naturally could not sleep. He brought the frightened officials to the Dragon Ascension Hall, where political affairs were handled. Yi Li and Mo Xiaoyao had just walked to the door when they heard Mo Xiaoyao's angry scolding. He was clearly reprimanding the guards for their negligence. Yi Li raised her eyebrows. She remembered that the current commander of the palace guards was Ling Haoyu's elder brother, Ling Qingyu. Stepping into the hall, they saw a young man who looked somewhat similar to Ling Haoyu kneeling on the ground, respectfully listening to Mo Jingqi's reprimand. Seeing the two enter, Mo Jingqi finally suppressed his desire to continue scolding. He thoughtfully stared at the two who walked in hand, asking, "Why is Princess Ding together with Prince Ding?" Yi Li smiled faintly. "Reporting to your majesty, Yi Li was worried about my prince's safety, so I brought people to look for him. In a rush, I did not have the time to report to your majesty. Please forgive me." Mo Jingqi looked at Yi Li with a complicated gaze before forcing out a smile. Prince Ding and Princess Ding are deeply in love. It's indeed a legend in Dechu State. It's natural for Princess to be worried about Prince Ding. How can we blame you? Yi Li seemed to be relieved. She smiled and said, "Yi Li thanks your majesty for your understanding." Chapter 276. Is my Princess Zhenning all right? Mo Xiaoyao turned his gaze to Mo Xiaoyao. Mo Xiaoyao nodded mildly. Princess Zhenning was a little frightened, but she wasn't injured. That's good. Mo Jingqi smiled. Zhenning is Zhen's beloved daughter. If anything happens to her, Zhen and my beloved concubine will be extremely distressed. Although he was smiling, Yi Li did not see the slightest hint of joy in his smile. What does Prince Ding think of tonight's incident? Mo Xiaoyao stared at Mo Jingqi and asked. Mo Xiaoyao frowned and said thoughtfully, "This official doesn't know, but they shouldn't have come for your majesty." Although most of the guards were protecting the emperor, those assassins didn't try to break through the encirclement to assassinate the emperor. Even if they really killed all the officials upstairs, it would at most make the emperor angry, but the actual impact wouldn't be that big. It was probably just a reshuffle of the cards in the imperial court. But... Official Ling, may I ask why the imperial guards arrived so late? Mo Xiaoyao turned around and pointed his gun at Ling Qingyu, who was still kneeling on the ground. Ling Qingyu looked up at Mo Xiaoyao and said in a low voice, "At that time, the assassins split up and attacked the palace several times. This official was careless and fell for the trick of luring the tiger away from the mountain. Please punish me, your majesty." Careless? Mo Xiaoyao said with a cold smile, "It seems that Senior Ling has already forgotten the reason for the existence of the imperial guards. Since you know that someone broke into the palace, regardless of whether there were assassins at Zhai Xinglu, shouldn't the first thing official Ling should do is to go to Zhai Xinglu to protect the emperor?" The dignified commander of the imperial guards was actually lured away by a few assassins. "I think you should change your position as the commander of the imperial guards." Ling Qingyu's indifferent expression stiffened, but he knew that Prince Ding was right. He had indeed failed in his duty tonight. No matter what Prince Ding said, he had no room to refute. "That's enough." Mo Jingqi frowned. Tonight, it was indeed Qingyu's fault. He'll be fined half a year's salary. The guards in the palace also need to be reorganized. Next time, I won't let them off easily. Mo Jingqi's words were equivalent to not punishing Ling Qingyu. The Ling family was a big family with a big business, and they didn't lack half a year's salary. Even if they were punished, they wouldn't be punished. Originally, if it was someone else, even if they didn't lose their head, they would probably lose their official position. However, since the emperor had already spoken first, it was not good for him to say anything more. Hearing Mo Xiaoyao's words, Mo Xiaoyao lowered his head and did not refute. Seeing that Mo Xiaoyao did not say anything, Mo Jingqi nodded in satisfaction. Tonight's matter should be left to Prince Ding to investigate, right? I'm sure Prince Ding will give me an explanation as soon as possible. Mo Xiaoyao frowned and said, Your Majesty, please forgive me. There is still a month before I leave for the northern tribes. Also, the prince of the northern tribes and his residents have many other matters to attend to. I'm afraid he won't be able to do anything else. Mo Jingqi paused and did not force him. He nodded and said, I didn't consider it thoroughly. Fine, I'll leave it to Prime Minister Liu to investigate. Mo Xiaoyao did not have any objections. In fact, even if he did, Mo Jingqi would not listen to him. After leaving the palace, in the carriage, Yili looked at Mo Xiaoyao strangely. You're helping Ling Qingyu. Mo Xiaoyao looked at her with a smile and raised his brows. You can tell. Yili pursed her lips. It's too obvious. Everyone could tell that Mo Xiaoyao was deliberately targeting Ling Qingyu in the palace. But at the same time, even if Mo Xiaoyao really disliked Ling Qingyu, there was no need to make things difficult for him at that time. And with Mo Xiaoyao's personality, if Mo Xiaoyao wanted to demote him, he would definitely protect him. If it weren't for Mo Xiaoyao making things difficult for him, no matter how much Mo Jingqi trusted Ling Qingyu, he would not have only fined him half a year's salary. How come I didn't know that your relationship with Ling Qingyu is so good? Is it because of Ling Er? Mo Xiaoyao shook his head. Ling Er doesn't need me to give him face. Besides, even if I save a beggar on the roadside, he won't ask me to help his elder brother. Yili lowered her brows and thought for a moment before looking up at him. You want to help Mo Jingqi and the Ling family? Mo Xiaoyao leisurely leaned against the carriage and said with a smile, my wife is so smart. This is just a small trick. Mo Jingqi will understand it later. However, as long as Mo Jingqi has the slightest suspicion, even if he knows it in his heart, he can't help but guard against Ling Qingyu. This way, it will be easier for us to add fuel to the fire in the future. Yili understood that this was paving the way in advance. If Mo Jingqi and the Ding King's manor were at peace in the future, Ling Qingyu would naturally be his confidant. If it was inevitable, Mo Jingqi's trusted aides would naturally be eliminated by the Ding King's manor. Thinking of Mo Xiaoyao's long journey in more than a month, Yili couldn't help but frown. For some reason, there was a faint uneasiness in her heart. What's wrong, Li? Mo Xiaoyao looked down at her deeply furrowed brows and asked softly. Yili looked up at him. What are your plans for going to the northern tribes? Mo Xiaoyao said with a smile, don't worry, Li. The northern tribes won't attack me openly. Although there are many things in the dark, who has the Ding King's manor been afraid of for so many years? Yili frowned. It's better to be careful. Knowing that she was worried about him, Mo Xiaoyao took her into his arms and said softly, I know. Don't worry, Li. I'll come back safely. Yili nodded heavily, one hand unconsciously grasping Mo Xiaoyao's lapel. The next morning, while Yili was still practicing martial arts on the training ground, Director Mo hurried to report that the prince of the northern tribes had asked for an audience. Yili also knew that there was only a little more than a month's time. Not only did she have to choose a suitable bride, but more importantly, she also had to teach the bride the etiquette and rules of the royal family. This was not something that could be done in a day. Since the founding of the Dechu state, they had never sent their princesses to foreign countries for political marriages. Even if the marriage was really arranged, it would take nearly a year's time. This time, Mo Jingqi suddenly agreed to the marriage with the northern tribes. The conditions of both sides were relaxed as if it was child's play. Although no one really treated this marriage as a big deal, they still had to go through the motions on the surface. Is the prince here? Yili threw her sword back into the sheath hanging at the side. Director Mo said, Feng San young master came early this morning to request an audience with the prince. The prince has gone out. Yili nodded. Invite Prince Yelu to the hall. Also, send over the list of the capital's noble ladies that was organized a few days ago. Princess Consort, this Prince Ding mansion's door is really not easy to enter. Before Chief Steward Mo could answer, Yelu Ye's laughter came from afar. Outside the crescent-shaped door, Yelu Ye narrowed his eyes at the guards of the Ding King's manor blocking his way. His expression didn't change, but he felt regretful that he couldn't force his way in. As expected of the Ding King's manor that had caused so many assassins and spies to return in failure. The security was more than 10 times better than the Dechu State's palace. Looking at the indifferent guards in front of him, Yi didn't force his way in. As long as these people didn't let him in, he definitely wouldn't be able to break through the encirclement in a short time. Besides, angering the beauty was not worth it. Chapter 277. Withdraw. Yi appeared behind the guards with Chief Steward Mo and said softly. The guards silently accepted the order and withdrew. Yi raised his eyebrows and sized up the woman in front of him. Different from the previous times, this time Yi was wearing a simple white dress with a green belt around her waist. Her black hair was casually pulled up without any makeup. Without any powder, it showed her picturesque appearance and extraordinary temperament. Yi smiled and said, "Did this one disturb Wang Fei?" Yi looked at him with a smile that wasn't a smile and said, "If Wang Fei is really worried about disturbing, why force your way in?" Yi smiled innocently and said, "This one just wanted to enjoy the beautiful scenery of Dingguo Wangfu." Who knew that Dingguo Wangfu would be so strict? Yi didn't feel the need to refute this kind of sophistry. She smiled faintly and said, "Wang Fei, please have tea in the front hall. Ben Fei will leave first." "Wait." Yi stepped forward. Chief Steward Mo, who was standing beside Yi, also stepped forward to block Yi. He smiled faintly and said, "Wang Fei, please conduct yourself with dignity." Yi laughed loudly and said, "Was Wang Fei practicing martial arts just now? This one is very curious about the martial arts of the Central Plains. I don't know if I have the honor to exchange pointers with Wang Fei." Chief Steward Mo said, "Dingguo Wangfu is full of experts. If Wang Fei wants to exchange pointers, this one can choose a few to exchange pointers with Wang Fei. Even this old man can accompany Wang Fei to pass the time." Yi smiled and looked at Yi, saying, "I naturally know that Dingguo Wangfu is full of experts. However, this one wants to experience Dingguo Wangfei's skills." Yi said faintly, "I thought that I had already exchanged pointers with Wang Fei last night. What's more, Wang Fei's martial arts were also learned from the Central Plains. Since that's the case, what is there to be curious about?" Yi was startled. His martial arts were indeed learned from the people of the Central Plains. However, he had always avoided using the martial arts of the Central Plains. So it turned out that he didn't avoid other people's eyes? Wang Fei has good eyesight. Last night, he had hurriedly skipped a few moves. It was truly regrettable. Yi lowered her eyes and turned, saying, "If that's the case, then Prince Yelu, please." Finishing, she turned and went in first. Looking at Yi's back, Yi raised his eyebrows and happily followed after her. After entering the training grounds behind the wall, Yi was slightly disappointed. This training grounds that was hidden in the depths of the back courtyard of the Ding King's manor was no different from other places. However, after thinking about it, he felt that it was only natural. Mo Xiaoyao had been crippled for 7 to 8 years, so he didn't need to use the martial arts arena. Furthermore, even if there were any secrets in the Ding King's residence, it was impossible for it to be placed openly in a residence that could be broken into at any time. Although no one had successfully broken into the residence for so many years. What he didn't know was that half a month ago, this place was completely different. However, now that Yi had a better choice, she got rid of the simplified versions in the manor. As for her daily training, she didn't need them anymore. Yi walked to the middle of the training grounds and turned around to look at Yi, who was following behind her. She calmly said, "Prince Yelu, please." Yi couldn't help but frown. He just realized that this Ding country princess consort wasn't as easy to deal with as he had imagined. He didn't believe that Yi couldn't see that he didn't really want to spar with her. However, she pretended not to know and walked to the training grounds with a serious expression, waiting for him to start. She even put on an expression as if he was a guest, as if she wanted to let him exchange a few moves to fulfill the etiquette of a host. This made Yi not know whether to laugh or cry. wanting a woman to give way to him during a martial arts competition. If this was spread back to the northern tribes, his crown Prince Gij would laugh him to death. He was the seventh prince of the northern tribes with a noble status and extraordinary appearance. Even those bold and generous northern tribes women couldn't help but blush and shy in front of him. However, this woman had been deliberately teased by him several times, but she didn't have the slightest reaction. If a woman could remain calm even when an extraordinary man deliberately tried to be friendly to her, then it had to be said that this woman wasn't easy to deal with. Walking to the training grounds, Yellow Yi smiled and said, "Does Princess Consort not take a weapon? Does Princess Consort learn the sword?" Yi Li said indifferently, "Prince also said that I learn the sword. How would I dare to show off what I'm still learning?" Yellow Yi nodded, "I also feel that Princess Consort uses a short weapon very well. It wasn't just good." Thinking of the two unexpected stabs last night, he couldn't help but feel a chill in his heart. "Princess Consort, please. Please," Yi Li said. On the training grounds of the Ding country King's Fu, Yellow Yi stared intently at the white-clothed woman opposite him. Neither of them made the first move. Looking at the calm and sharp woman in front of him, Yellow Yi's expression didn't change, but he was inwardly shocked. Now he understood why last year's outstanding archery Princess Lingyun was defeated by a Ding country princess consort who didn't even know how to use a bow. When experts exchanged blows, it didn't just test physical strength, speed, moves, and internal energy. More importantly, it tested the determination to win and the momentum to overwhelm the opponent. Yellow Yi didn't know how high the woman's martial arts were, but he could tell from her calm demeanor and the sharp blade-like aura flowing in her calm eyes that she was not afraid of anything. The mental state of the Ding country King's Fu was enough to rank her among the top experts. The atmosphere on the training grounds gradually became heavy. Yellow Yi frowned and pulled out a soft sword from his waist. "Princess Consort, please." Yi Li stood with her hands clasped behind her back, indifferently saying, "Prince, please." Yellow Yi couldn't help but smile bitterly in his heart. It seemed that this Ding country consort had decided to let him make the first move. Before, when he said that he wanted to compete with Yi Li, other than wanting to come in and take a look, it was more of a joke to talk to her. But now that the pretense had become real, he couldn't even not compete. Helplessly shrugging his shoulders, Yellow Yi smiled, "Since that's the case, this little prince won't be polite." The soft sword in his hand trembled, drawing a sword flower in the air. Yellow Yi used a very ordinary opening move to stab towards Yi Li. Yi Li frowned slightly, quickly moving to the side. A cold light flashed from her sleeve, a dagger that could cut iron like mud stabbed towards Yellow Yi's heart. After a few moves, Yellow Yi finally put away the relaxed expression in his eyes. He finally understood why Yi Li dared to let him have the first move so generously. It wasn't because she was arrogant or ignorant, but because she really did have the strength to match her opponent. After several moves, Yellow Yi had already discovered that if he persisted in using this kind of tepid sword style, he wouldn't be able to defeat this seemingly delicate white-clothed woman in front of him. Yi Li's moves were swift and fierce, each move hiding a murderous intent. Completely different from the gentle and beautiful moves of the average woman, she didn't care whether the moves looked good or not. The only thing she cared about was whether the moves were useful or not. In the beginning, clearing out the enemy made Yellow Yi's hands and feet somewhat tied. Understanding Yi Li's strength, Yellow Yi didn't want to give in anymore. The soft sword in his hand trembled, his moves also becoming swift and fierce. The northern tribes people were innately valiant. Originally, they weren't suited to learn such a feminine weapon like the soft sword, but Yellow Yi's swordsmanship was very good. But from that night when he fought with Mu Yang, Yi Li could see that Yellow Yi didn't purely walk the feminine path. His masculine martial arts were also very good. It could be said that he was a rare martial arts master that combined strength and gentleness. Chapter 278. In the martial arts arena, the two of them were locked in a fierce battle. Outside the martial arts arena, Chief Steward Mo focused on the two of them fighting, his deep old eyes filled with worry and relief. The current Ding King Fu seemed to have unlimited glory, but in reality there was a hidden danger. This required a decisive and intelligent Wang Fei. Now it seemed that Wang Fei was not only intelligent and determined, even her martial arts could be considered first class. This made Chief Steward Mo pleasantly surprised and couldn't help but thank the Ding King Fu's ancestors for their blessings. In the blink of an eye, they had already exchanged over 100 moves. Yellow Yi looked at the calm expression of the woman opposite him and couldn't help but sigh in his heart. It seemed that the woman in front of him would always surprise him again and again. He originally thought that even though Yi Li's moves were fierce, she was still a woman and her physical strength was destined to be inferior to a man. Yellow Yi had also seen from the start that Yi Li's internal energy wasn't that deep. As long as the battle dragged on, no matter how exquisite her moves were, it would be useless. But he didn't expect that after so long, she didn't show any signs of fatigue, as if she could continue fighting endlessly. Yellow Ye's eyes darkened, the long sword in his hand drew a long arc as he retreated backwards. Yi Li's eyes flashed and she stood still, not chasing after him. Seeing her stop, Yellow Yi secretly sighed in relief. Since he couldn't hurt or kill, if he continued to fight like this, regardless of winning or losing, the one who would be embarrassed would be him. I didn't expect Princess Ding to be so agile. Xiao Wang admires you. Yellow Yi laughed as he put the software back on his waist. Yi Li faintly frowned and said, since Wang Fei thinks it's enough, then please go to the front hall to drink some tea. We can discuss proper matters then. Yellow Yi nodded indifferently and Chief Steward Mo, who was standing at the side, came forward to invite Yellow Yi to the front hall. Yi Li returned to her room and changed her clothes. Her conversation with Yellow Yi was naturally a battle of words. This prince of the northern tribes did not match the image of the northern tribes in the hearts of the people of Dechu State. In comparison, he was more like a person from Dechu State and Xiling. He was cunning, sharp, and wouldn't give in when it came to benefits. The two of them discussed the list that Yi Li had prepared in advance for a long time. In the end, they decided to choose Princess Ronghua, the niece of the Lu family's noble consort Lu, and Princess Qingyi, the youngest granddaughter of Mo Jingqi's only uncle, Old Jia Prince. However, Princess Qingyi was the only living granddaughter of the old prince. She was only 13 this year. The only reason she was added was to make the name list look better. It was because Dechu State's imperial family always had more males than females. There were no princesses or princesses that could be brought out. But that was all. Regardless of whether it was for the sake of the old prince, or because Princess Qingyi was too young and in poor health. In the end, he would have to choose between Princess Ronghua and the daughter of the Lu family. In the end, Yellow Yi had to personally meet these three people before he could make a decision. Yi Li didn't care about this. It was already good enough that she was able to persuade Yellow Yi to only choose 3 people to meet. If Yellow Yi met all the daughters that were being chosen, the aristocratic families in the capital wouldn't be able to continue living. Presumably, after the northern tribe's wedding procession left, there would be many happy events in the capital. After sending Yellow Yi away, Yi Li didn't have time to get up and return to her room when someone came to report that Miss Yaoji wanted to see her. With Yaoji's status, she naturally couldn't be invited into the manor like Yellow Yi and wait to report to the princess consort. She could only wait outside the manor's side door to see if the princess consort would see her. Yi Li was stunned. She had been so busy these 2 days that she had forgotten about Yaoji. She frowned and said, "Let her in." After a while, Yaoji followed the servant girl in. Different from her usual enchanting attire, this time Yaoji was only wearing an ordinary autumn-colored robe. She looked less beautiful and more delicate, like an ordinary woman of a good family. "Greetings to Princess Consort." Yaoji bowed her head slightly. Yi Li waved her hand and said, "No need. But if you have something to say, sit down and talk." Yaoji raised her head to look at her and thanked her in a low voice. "I didn't think that Princess Consort would be willing to see me." Yi Li smiled faintly and said, "If you were so sure that I wouldn't see you, why would you come?" Even though they hadn't interacted much, but Yi Li could see that Yaoji was a very proud woman and wouldn't come to ask for a rebuff. Yaoji stilled and then nodded with a bitter smile, saying, "Princess Consort is right." Yi Li looked at her thin and pale face and hesitated before asking, "Are you well?" Yaoji smiled faintly and said, "What is there to be well about? I shamelessly came today to ask for Princess Consort's help." Yili nodded and said, "Speak. If I can help, I won't refuse." Yaoji said, "I plan to close Qingqing Lane, but it's fine if I'm alone, but there are many girls in Qingqing Lane, they are all people with hard lives. If I don't care about them, they may go to other brothels, and I don't know where they will end up. Originally, I wronged them, so I want to ask Princess Consort if the Prince Ding Mansion is willing to buy Qingqing Lane. Yaoji is willing to sell it at half price, as long as you can take care of the old people in Qingqing Lane." Yili frowned slightly and said, "Qingqing Lane is known as the #1 brothel in Jing City. If you want to sell it, there will be many people fighting to buy it. Why do you?" Yaoji's smile was bitter. She looked at Yili and said, "Do you think I don't know what kind of people do the brothel business in Jing City? I don't know how Qingqing Lane will be ruined in the hands of those people. Also, I hope that the news of Qingqing Lane changing owners will not spread for at least half a year." Yili frowned and immediately understood Yaoji's intention. "What do you plan to do?" Yaoji lowered her head and unconsciously stroked her still flat stomach. She smiled faintly and said, "Go to the south to take a look. The climate in the south is much more comfortable than in Jing City, isn't it? I've saved a lot of money these years. Even if I want to live a good life, it won't be a problem." Yili frowned slightly. She wasn't asking about money. Even a dancer at Yaoji's level didn't have to worry about money. But not to mention the instability in the south, Yaoji's body wasn't suitable to travel thousands of li to Jiangnan. Rubbing her brows, Yili changed the topic and asked, "Feng San has already returned to Jing City. You haven't seen him yet, right?" Yaoji smiled and said, "He came to see me yesterday morning, but he was very busy. So, Princess, you don't have to tell him about my messy affairs." Yili said, "I thought you had a good relationship with Feng San." Yaoji smiled and said, "Young Master Feng San is my friend, the only true friend. Princess, you don't have to test me. Young Master Feng San doesn't have that kind of feeling for me. Of course, I really treat him as a friend. We just are in the same boat." Yili softly apologized. She knew Feng Xiao had someone in his heart, but she had never heard Feng San or anyone else mention this person. Maybe Mo Xiaoyao knew, but after all, this was Feng San's private matter. Mo Xiaoyao wouldn't take the initiative to tell her, and she wouldn't ask. Yaoji shook her head generously and said with a smile, "I know you care about me, but you really don't have to tell Feng San about this." Although young Master Feng San appeared to be indifferent to everything, he abhorred evil as if it were his enemy. He was going to find young Master Mu. "I've already told him that we've already made things clear, so the marriage between Marquis Muyang's mansion and Sun family has nothing to do with me." Chapter 279. Do you want to keep the child? Yili frowned. Yaoji had said so much. If she still didn't understand what she meant, she would have lived in vain all these years. It was not that she was cruel, but in this era, not to mention Yaoji's identity, even an ordinary woman would have a hard time if she had an unmarried child, and it would be even worse for the child in the future. Yaoji looked at her, and a touch of tenderness flashed across her beautiful face. She nodded and said, "Yes, this is my child. Princess, don't worry. Since I have said that I will cut off all ties with Mu Yang, I will never use this child to entangle with him in the future. After leaving the capital this time, I don't plan to come back. I can find a place where no one knows me and live incognito for the rest of my life." Yili shook her head and said, "I don't mean that. But have you ever thought about what to do after the child is born? What about your life in the future? Even if you raise the child alone, you will have enough money to spend. But what about after the child grows up? When the daughter gets married, which man doesn't need a clean family background for his future? Yaoji, this world is not tolerant of women." In fact, she was talking about the distant future. In the near future, Yaoji, who was so beautiful and talented, couldn't hide in a remote place. In a prosperous city, it was even more difficult for a beautiful woman to survive alone. Yaoji looked sad, and her eyes were full of sadness and helplessness. She stroked her abdomen with her jade-like hand and gritted her teeth. I know all these, but this is my child. Yili was speechless. Women in this era were not as easy as those in her previous life who thought abortion was as easy as eating food. Even though Yaoji was a prostitute, she was still soft-hearted to her own child, let alone the child of her and her beloved man. With Yaoji's temperament, Mu Yang must love her very much if she was willing to give herself to him. Unfortunately, even such a woman could be irrational sometimes. After a moment of silence, Yaoji raised her head and said to Yili, Princess, I understand what you said. Thank you for your concern, but I have decided about the child. I don't know about Qingqing Lane. Yili sighed slightly and nodded, I will buy Qingqing Lane. Since you have made up your mind, I won't say anything more. Take care of yourself. I'll have someone send you the banknotes later. Yaoji said gratefully, Thank you, Your Highness. Yili gently shook her head. Take care. Goodbye. After seeing Yaoji off, Yili was still sitting in the parlor, lost in thought. She didn't even notice when Mo Xiaoyao came in. Ali, what are you thinking about? Mo Xiaoyao asked with a smile. Yili shook her head and told her about the purchase of Qingqing Lane, but hid the fact that Yaoji was pregnant. Mo Xiaoyao naturally wouldn't care about a brothel girl. He nodded and smiled, Qingqing Lane is not a bad place. Even though Feng San often used Qingqing Lane to gather information, it belongs to someone else. He has to consider his relationship with Yaoji. We can buy it, but we can't put it under the name of the Prince Ding Mansion. Yili nodded. Originally, she didn't want the Prince Ding Mansion to buy it. I'll have Ming Shi handle it. If it was put under Chu Junwei's name, it wouldn't attract too much attention or arouse suspicion. If someone investigated, they would find that Chu Junwei had a few shops in various places. The most profitable one was in Guangling City. Mo Xiaoyao naturally didn't care about such a small matter. He sat next to Yili and asked, Did Yili fight with you today? Yili smiled faintly, it was just a casual exchange. But this Prince Yelu doesn't seem like a northern tribes person. Mo Xiaoyao raised his eyebrows and said, As a member of the imperial family, no matter if it's the northern tribes or the Dechu state, they can't avoid fighting and scheming. For him to be able to stand out among the many sons of the king of the northern tribes, his scheming methods are naturally incomparable. But, to dare to be so presumptuous in the Prince Ding Mansion, I have underestimated him. I just don't know if he's prepared to offend. Yili looked at Mo Xiaoyao in surprise. She thought about it and immediately understood what he was thinking. She just smiled faintly and didn't try to persuade him. The candidate for the political marriage has probably been decided. If it's not Princess Ronghua, it's Miss Lu. But I think Princess Ronghua has a higher chance. When the time comes, there will be more trouble. In terms of status, Princess Ronghua was higher than Miss Lu. In terms of looks, Princess Ronghua was also one of the top beauties in the capital. Moreover, with the Lu family's current status, they probably wouldn't want to marry off a legitimate daughter. After all, even if she became the crown princess, she would still be far away from the emperor. She wouldn't be of much help to the Lu family. What the Lu family needed now was to form alliances with various noble families through marriage. And Princess Ronghua was the beloved daughter of Princess Zhaoran. But so what? Princess Zhaoran couldn't even decide her own marriage, much less a daughter. Mo Xiaoyao calmly said, They can do whatever they want. You don't need to care. If it really doesn't work, just push it to the one in the palace. If you're annoyed, you can go visit Imperial Aunt. We can leave the capital for a few days. Yili thought of the group of elites she had left in Black Wind Valley. She couldn't help but smile, That's fine. In a few days, I'll be going out to do something. Because Yelu Yi had accepted Yili's suggestion to secretly observe the candidates, Yili threw this matter to the side. As expected, 2 days later, when the northern tribe's envoy arrived in the capital, the results of Yelu Yi's selection were announced. In the end, Princess Ronghua was chosen for the political marriage. Princess Ronghua was obviously the most suitable one in terms of status, age, and personality. Although Princess Zhaoran went to the palace to plead with the emperor on the same day, no one knew what Mo Jingqi said to her. Princess Zhaoran finally came out of the palace in a daze and didn't say anything. At that time, Princess Ronghua almost turned the capital upside down. In Princess Ronghua's eyes, Yi Li, the culprit who caused her to marry into a foreign family, naturally couldn't be let off. Unfortunately, King Ding's mansion was heavily guarded. It wasn't a place that could be entered as one wished. At this time, Yi Li had already been leisurely relaxing in Great Elder Princess Shifu's courtyard outside the city. Although Great Elder Princess Shifu was more than 70 years old, she was still in high spirits, perhaps because she paid attention to her daily maintenance and her excellent temperament. Compared with a year ago, she was no different. When she saw Yi Li and Mo Xiaoyao come together, she beamed with joy. Great Elder Princess's enthusiasm made Yi Li and Mo Xiaoyao feel a little guilty. After Mo Xiaoyao's health improved, Yi Li went out for a long time, so they didn't go out of the city to visit Great Elder Princess. On the contrary, Great Elder Princess didn't forget to send them something during the New Year and other festivals. Although it wasn't anything valuable, it was a token of Great Elder Princess's kindness and love. Great Elder Princess took Yi Li to sit in front of her. Looking at Mo Xiaoyao who was standing aside, she drove him away, saying that she wanted to have a private chat with Yi Li. Mo Xiaoyao had to turn around and leave, not knowing whether to laugh or cry. Seeing Mo Xiaoyao leave, Great Elder Princess took Yi Li's hand and looked at her with a smile. Yi Li suddenly felt a little embarrassed. She felt that Great Elder Princess's eyes were a little creepy. Imperial Aunt. Chapter 280. Great Elder Princess looked at her kindly and said with a smile, "I see that you have lost a lot of weight compared with last year. Xiaoyao doesn't know how to love his wife. How can he let you, a girl, go all the way to Nanjiang?" Yi Li lowered her head and felt a little ashamed. It was she who insisted on going to Nanjiang. However, Mo Xiaoyao should be the scapegoat. Great Elder Princess looked at her and nodded with satisfaction. "I have heard about what you did in Nanjiang and Yongzhou. You are a good girl taught by Lord Su. This time in Yonglin, it's all thanks to you. That child, Jingli, is really too mischievous. I am old and can't control them. With your help, Xiaoyao will be much more relaxed. The men of the Ding King's residence are born with a heavy burden on their shoulders. When it comes to Xiaoyao, it is even more difficult. Fortunately, you are here." Yi Li softly said, "These are all things that I should do." Great Elder Princess shook her head and said, "Not to mention that there are so many noble ladies in the capital city, no one can be better than you in the past King Ding's mansion." However, Yi Li looked at Great Elder Princess in confusion. Great Elder Princess looked at her with a smile and said, "Xiaoyao is not young anymore. Shouldn't you care about the children of King Ding's mansion? Now, among all the mansions in the capital city, only King Ding's mansion has no children." Hearing this, Yi Li's face suddenly flushed. Looking at Great Elder Princess who was full of expectation, Lin Mingya was at a loss for words for a long time. Great Elder Princess looked at her with a playful smile and said, "It's normal for you to have children. You have been married for more than a year. Why are you shy?" Yi Li felt extremely ashamed. Was it because she had stayed in this era for too long that she became conservative? However, about children, she really didn't think about it. On the one hand, she was less than 16 years old. On the other hand, it was not suitable for her to have children in the current situation. However, she couldn't tell Great Elder Princess directly that she didn't want to have children, so she had to be vague and try to get away with it first. Great Elder Princess just thought that she was shy, so she let it go after a few words. Instead, he was planning to remind Mo Xiaoyao when he got back. Seeing that Great Elder Princess stopped asking, Yi Li secretly breathed a sigh of relief and quickly changed the topic to talk about some interesting things in the capital city. Mo Xiaoyao only stayed with Yi Li for 2 days before returning to the capital. The northern tribe's envoys had all arrived in the capital, and as the prince in charge of this political marriage, he naturally could not avoid meeting them. Except for chatting with Great Elder Princess every day, Yili spent the rest of her time in the deep valley under the cliff of Black Wind Mountain. Great Elder Princess knew that Yili went out every day, but she didn't ask about Yili's whereabouts. With the cover of Great Elder Princess, Yili could act more freely. After nearly half a month, when Yili appeared at the foot of the cliff again, she nodded with satisfaction when she saw a group of elites sweating on the drill ground. It was quite good that they could achieve such results in less than a month. As long as they were not in a hurry, they should have received at least 2 months of physical training before they could talk about other things. When the dusty and sweaty soldiers saw Child Chu, who was still smiling, they all worried in their hearts. They didn't know the identity of Child Chu, but they all knew the identity of Qin Feng. To be able to have Qin Feng as his personal bodyguard, this young Master Chu's identity must be extraordinary. However, this was not necessary. The important thing was that they had only met Child Chu twice, but each time they remembered him and had a deep impression on them. When they met for the first time, Child Chu mercilessly destroyed everyone's confidence and then watched them all run and crawl on the ground with a smile on his face. When they met for the second time, Child Chu shocked all of them and gave them a task that made them extremely tired in the past half a month. And this time, what would Child Chu bring? Everyone, although I haven't seen you for half a month, Qin Feng has reported your training to me. I'm very satisfied. In particular, you are the first batch of people to receive the training, and none of you fell behind. But it's just the most basic physical training before. You didn't fall behind, which means that your physical fitness and potential are good. From today on, you will start to receive more detailed training. Of course, the original physical training will continue every day. The soldiers couldn't help but wail in their hearts, which meant that they had to squeeze out time from the hard training every day to learn other things. Obviously, the training in the past half a month was effective. At least these soldiers from several different teams now had a very good sense of discipline. Even if they complained in their hearts, they still stood upright on the surface. Yili nodded with satisfaction in her heart and said, "Stand out when I call your name." She lowered her head and opened the file in her hand. Yili called out 7 or 8 names, and the people who were called out walked out and stood in another line. Without exception, all of these people had their own skills and were relatively knowledgeable. Yili looked at the people selected by Qin Feng and said, "You guys wait for me at a training ground 10 miles to the southeast." A few soldiers who were specially selected hesitated, and one of them stepped out and said, "Child Chu, may I ask what we are going to do? Why don't we train together?" Yili smiled and said, "Because I think you guys need some different training." "Of course. I should ask for your opinion first. Are you afraid of death?" The soldiers suddenly felt insulted, and they angrily stared at Yili. "If we're afraid of death, we're not a Mahist army. Only cowards are afraid of death. We're not afraid of death, but we want to know what we're going to do. At least we don't want to die without knowing why." Yili didn't get angry, and nodded with a smile, "Very good, I like people who have their own ideas. But now, the first thing you need to do is to obey, the second is to completely obey, and the third is, to absolutely obey. Do you understand?" Yili's calm and solemn voice stunned everyone, and the training ground suddenly quieted down. No matter if it was the soldiers who were called out or the soldiers who were left behind, they all stopped talking and said in unison, "Understood." "Very good, then run now, 15 minutes. The people who were called out didn't hesitate to turn around and run out of the training ground, disappearing into the dense forest. Yili looked back at the people who were left behind, and said with a smile, "Don't worry about them, I won't really send them to their deaths. Now you should worry about yourselves. What you're going to learn next is weight training, fully armed swimming training, wilderness survival training, breakout and anti-breakout training, infiltration and anti-infiltration training, as well as infiltration and intelligence gathering training. Your instructor will arrive early tomorrow morning, and the final assessment is set for 2 months later. I can tell you what the assessment is first, so it's fine if you're mentally prepared. Carry a weight of 40 jin, carry a day's worth of army rations, and survive in the wilderness for 7 days. The objective of the mission is to ambush a Black Cloud Cavalry and Shadow Guard allied army 1,200 li away from here. The requirements are that there will be 2 teams searching for you along the way, and they will ambush you at any time. You're not allowed to steal food, cattle, or horses from the farmers along the way. You're not allowed to reveal your identity, and you're not allowed to be caught by the local troops or patrolling soldiers. You're also not allowed to be heavily injured along the way, and you're also eliminated if you don't reach the target by the deadline. Do you understand? The faces of the soldiers in the training ground all turned green. They originally thought that their training was very tough, but young Master Chu always knew how to make it even harder for them. Compared to the later training, the current training was simply like retirement. Chapter 281. Yili raised an eyebrow as she looked at them and said, "You should be grateful that it isn't winter right now. Otherwise, your days would be even harder. But don't worry, I will make it up to you this winter. Other than that, do you want to add in some heat resistance training?" No, this was what all the soldiers thought. Yili was not troubled. The weather in the north isn't very useful. There probably won't be any opportunities this year. After you pass, there will be a chance to bring more comrades to the south to train next year. For now, that's all. Qin Feng. Yes, young master. Qin Feng came forward. He was not very shocked by what Yi Li had said because he had already been tortured by Insan many times in the past few days. It was precisely because of this that he began to admire Yi Li even more. His loyalty to Yi Li was almost on par with his loyalty to Prince Ding. In Qin Feng's eyes, the Princess Ding he followed was a peerless genius. You could never imagine what kind of strange ideas Princess Ding had in her head. Just looking at how Princess Ding had used less than a year to train the shadow guards around her to this level, it could be seen how far away Princess Ding was. Thinking of Insan, Qin Feng followed Yi Li into the forest as he silently prayed for the soldiers. "Come with me." Yi Li turned back and said to him. Qin Feng responded and followed, throwing the pitiful soldiers behind him to the back of his mind. He was still struggling in the hands of others. How could he save them? The swamp forest, which was full of poisonous insects, poisonous plants, and traps, seemed to be flat ground under Yi Li's feet. Qin Feng carefully followed beside Yi Li, but was somewhat dismayed to find that the princess's movements were always faster than his. Just as he was about to make a move to kill the snake on the treetop, he heard a soft sound. A sharp dart had been fixed on the snake's 7-inch head, and it fell to the ground with a thud. Yi Li walked forward and looked down. She turned back and smiled at Qin Feng. 100-flower snake, not poisonous. It has good practical and medicinal value. Take it back to Mr. Chen. Maybe he will teach you a few ways to identify poisons. Haven't you been learning this recently? Qin Feng nodded. He walked over and carefully put away the dead snake. He asked with some shame, "Wang Fei even knows all snakes?" Yi Li replied without any guilt, "I know most of the poisonous ones. I know after reading a bit more. Don't be afraid. I've looked carefully. There are only 2 kinds of poisonous snakes in this forest and they aren't very poisonous. Even if it isn't fatal, when they come in for training, I will find a few skilled doctors to stay here." Qin Feng wanted to say he wasn't afraid, but thinking about the snakes, insects, rats, and ants in this forest, he felt that the place Wang Fei had chosen was creepy. 10 li was not a long distance for 2 agile people. A short while later, the 2 appeared at a training ground on the other side of the mountain valley. What surprised Qin Feng was that this training ground, which he had thought would be even harsher, was not as he had imagined. This place was still near the edge of the mountain valley. Because of the terrain, it was even brighter and more comfortable than the bottom of the cliff where they were. The sunlight shone on this place. A small courtyard stood by the stream by the forest. The people who had been called out were standing on the grass in front of the courtyard, waiting for their arrival. Yi Li swept a look across the 7 people. Even though their faces and bodies had some small scratches, they were not serious. She nodded in satisfaction and said, "It seems that you have trained well. I know that you have doubts about me separating you out. But that is not important. The reason I did this is because your future studies will be different from theirs. Similarly, the missions you will perform in the future will be different from theirs." One of them stood and asked, "What's the difference?" Yili said calmly, "Their future missions will be small-scale fierce battles, such as sneak attacks, rescue, protection, sniping and so on. As for you guys, you may not need to fight. What I need more is your brains. What you need to do in the future is to hide, explore, analyze, and pass on information. Of course, it may be assassinations, guards, etc." The soldiers frowned and looked at each other. "Young Master Chu wants us to be spies?" "Spies?" Yili raised an eyebrow and said, "You can say that. This is one of the missions you may need in the future. But I like to call it agents or spies. Compared to their military training, what you need to learn is the languages of other countries and even the local dialects. Psychological analysis, the customs of other countries, disguises, tracking and anti-tracking, the establishment and management of an intelligence network. Also, you need to learn all kinds of tools, fighting, close combat, assassination, etc. You are all chosen from these dozens of elites. Whether it is your family background, ability, knowledge, or intelligence, you are the most suitable candidates. Even though you are different from them, you are still part of the Mahist army. The promises I made last time are still valid. Also, if you die in the line of duty or get injured, the pension and relocation expenses will be 3 times. Of course, before that, you have the opportunity to withdraw. Those who withdraw can return to the other side to continue training." The few people were silent for a while. These people were the ones with the most potential in this group. They quickly made a decision. Even though they did not know who this young Master Chu was, they felt that he was different from the other generals. The things he said were both novel and attractive to them. It was as if it would bring a different journey to their future. As men, who did not want to be famous? Who did not want to be successful? Compared to those illiterate people who only knew how to obey, they thought more clearly. Reporting to young master, "We will stay." Yili raised an eyebrow. She looked at them with a faint smile and said, "You really do not fear death. I will not lie to you. You should know that whether it is spying or training, it is a very dangerous matter. And even if there is no danger to your life, you may never be able to return home or see your family. This subordinate understands. I believe that the prince and princess will take good care of our families." These words were not bad. At least compared to other armies, the Mahist army treated their soldiers very well. Yili nodded and said, "Very good. No matter what, I will guarantee that your families will not have to worry about food or clothing. You can rest as you wish today. The training will start tomorrow." "Yes, young master." In the next few days, Yili would personally go to the valley under the Black Cloud Mountain to personally instruct the people she had chosen. Qin Feng, who had been learning by her side, benefited greatly. He admired Yili's abilities even more. Qin Feng could not understand. Wang Fei was clearly a young woman in her teens. How could she know so many things that people like them had never heard of before? Qin Feng thought of himself as smart, but he had to admit that if he wanted to master everything that Wang Fei taught him, he would need at least 10 or 20 years. Chapter 282. Yili also paid attention to the psychology and thoughts of these soldiers who had been selected to be trained as spies. So when she taught them, she would add in some of the stories of legendary agents from her previous life. Even though she didn't mention their names, it made these smart soldiers understand the importance of the missions they would have to undertake in the future, and that as spies, spies were not as bad as they thought. Sometimes, they could even decide the outcome of a battle. The faint regret and dissatisfaction that they might have had in their hearts was buried by the new knowledge and skills that Yili had brought. "Wang Fei, do you already have a plan for this group of people?" Following beside Yili, Qin Feng asked curiously as he watched Yili bend over the table and write. Yili raised her head to look at him and said, "They can only be considered experiments. I don't know what kind of use they will have." Training a qualified spy was much more difficult than training 100 qualified elite soldiers, and it would take much more time. Also, I'm not very familiar with this area. Qin Feng smiled and said, "This subordinate can't see that Wang Fei is unfamiliar with this area. Listening to what Wang Fei has taught these days, this subordinate feels that it is new. There are many things that I have never thought of before. I really don't understand how Wang Fei thought of them." Yili looked at him with a smile that wasn't a smile and asked, "You really want to know?" Qin Feng stilled and couldn't help but shrink his neck. He shook his head and said, "This subordinate is just joking." The Su family had been scholars for generations. There were many famous scholars. It wasn't a big deal to have a genius like Wang Fei, right? Looking at the thick stack of files on the table, Qin Feng frowned and said, "Wang Fei, if you want to train spies, why do you only choose men and not women? After all, women are less likely to attract suspicion." Yili glanced at him in exasperation and said, "You think I haven't thought about it? How could it be so easy to find a suitable woman? Women don't have to be men. If it's a man, it's fine even if his appearance is mediocre, and it's less likely for people to be wary. But if it's a woman, she definitely needs to be extremely talented, beautiful and skillful. Otherwise, she won't even be able to get close to the enemy, let alone other things." Qin Feng nodded and said, "Wang Fei is right." Yili said, "In the future, you'll probably still be in charge of this. You should pay attention to whether there are any suitable candidates. As for the others, I will be returning to the capital in 2 days. These are all things that they still need to learn. You can take a look at them yourself. When this is over, I will ask someone else to teach them something else. I have 2 spots for admission to Lishan Academy. Once their training is over, you can pick 2 and send them over." Qin Feng was stunned. Lishan Academy was a place where many disciples of Dechu State's prestigious families could not squeeze into. These soldiers at the bottom of the military did not have good family backgrounds. No matter what Wang Fei wanted to do, it was a great grace for them to be able to study at Lishan Academy. "Many thanks, Wang Fei." Yili waved her hand and said, "There is no need to thank me. Try to choose younger ones. In addition, if they can't pass the entrance exam of Lishan Academy, it will be useless." Qin Feng said with a smile, "These people's families are all educated. They are a little different from those rough men in the military. Knowing that Wang Fei is so kind, they will try their best to pass the exam." Yili nodded with satisfaction. When she was about to say something else, a sharp voice suddenly came from outside the door. "Yili, get out!" Qin Feng frowned unhappily and said, "Who is so bold to make trouble in Great Elder Princess's yard?" As soon as Yili heard the sharp voice, she knew who it was. She smiled and said, "It's been so many days and she finally comes. It's not easy for her to make trouble. But now I'm afraid that everyone tolerates her. She can make trouble for a while if she wants. Tell someone to lead her here. Don't disturb my aunt's rest." "Is it Infanta Ronghua?" "It's Princess Ronghua." Yili corrected him. Although she didn't live in the capital city, what happened in the capital city was sent to her desk on time every day. The emperor granted Infanta Ronghua the title of Princess Ronghua and her marriage to the northern tribes. These days, Princess Zhaoran's mansion was in chaos. At first, Infanta Ronghua thought that her mother and aunt could support her. When she found that her mother couldn't do anything, she began to make a scene and even went on a hunger strike. Princess Zhaoran was so anxious that her hair almost turned white. However, no matter how mischievous Infanta Ronghua was, how could she defy the emperor's order? She was forced to learn the etiquette in the palace by the female officials sent by the palace every day. Infanta Ronghua was born in the royal family. Although she was not as strict as the princesses in the palace, her etiquette was not bad and she didn't suffer much. But why did she come here to make trouble today? Hearing the noise outside, Yili put down her writing brush and went out. As soon as she went out, she saw Infanta Ronghua leading people in. When she saw Yi Li come out, her eyes were full of hatred and anger. "Yi Li, you bitch, I'll kill you." Seeing Yi Li, Infanta Ronghua looked as if she saw the enemy of several lifetimes. She threw herself at Yi Li without any care. Yi Li frowned slightly. Qin Feng, who was behind her, stepped forward and blocked Infanta Ronghua 2 steps away from Yi Li. He said lightly, "Princess, please have some self-respect." The title of princess made Infanta Ronghua's face suddenly twisted. She angrily rebuked, "Shut up, do I need a servant like you to criticize me?" Qin Feng faintly raised his eyebrows and said, "Sorry, princess, I'm a subordinate of the Ding King's mansion, not your servant." You. Infanta Ronghua had always been domineering. She was angry, but she didn't expect that a servant of the Ding King's mansion dared to be so rude to her. She was so angry that she couldn't speak for a long time. Only then did the servants behind her come back to their senses and rush forward to comfort her. Infanta Ronghua was upset by the noise in her ears. She turned around and slapped the people around her hard, saying, "Shut up, all of you." There was a sudden silence in the yard. The servants around Infanta Ronghua hurriedly kept quiet and didn't dare to make their master angry. Yi Li waved her hand and said to Qin Feng, "Qin Feng, you go ahead." Qin Feng frowned disapprovingly and said, "Princess, I'm afraid it's not appropriate." Yi Li smiled faintly and said, "Don't worry, Infanta Ronghua won't do anything to me." Although Qin Feng was worried about the crazy Princess Ronghua, he still chose to believe the princess. After all, they were now in the yard of Great Elder Princess. Even if Princess Ronghua really wanted to do something, it was not so easy. As for fighting, Qin Feng didn't dare to say that he could defeat the princess. 10 of Princess Ronghua were not enough to deal with the princess. After Qin Feng left, Yi Li turned back and smiled at Infanta Ronghua, saying, "Princess, please come in." Infanta Ronghua was a little embarrassed by her kind attitude. She stared at her vigilantly and said, "What tricks do you have?" Yi Li smiled faintly and said, "Don't worry, I won't play any tricks on you." Do I need to play tricks on a princess who is engaged in a marriage for peace? You! Infanta Ronghua was so angry that her face turned red. Yi Li smiled and said, "Princess, you'd better sit down inside and talk." Chapter 283. In the end, Princess Ronghua obediently went into the parlor and sat down. However, her almond eyes were still glaring at Yi Li. Yi Li took a sip of tea and asked, "Princess, why did you come here today? Just to vent your anger? If so, I won't fight back. You can make a scene, curse, and smash things, as long as you're happy. But, what's the point? Can it change the situation now? Moreover, do you really think that you're marrying the northern tribes because of me?" Princess Ronghua was stunned, but soon she puffed up her cheeks and said, "Of course it's because of you. Who asked you to add me? Do you dare to say that you don't want to take revenge?" Yi Li raised her eyebrows and said, "Take revenge? You can think of it that way, but the order was given by the emperor. I just chose the most suitable person. In the end, the one who chose you was not me." Princess Ronghua said angrily, "Why didn't you cross out my name?" Yi Li looked at her with some amusement and asked, "Why should I cross out your name?" Was she familiar with Princess Ronghua? Did they have a good relationship? "I don't want to marry. The barbarians of the northern tribes are so vulgar and ugly." Looking at Princess Ronghua's proud face finally showing a trace of fear and weakness, Yi Li sighed in her heart. Who wants to marry? Princess Ronghua was stunned and couldn't speak for a long time. Yes, the northern tribes was not a good place. Who would be willing to marry a daughter of a noble family? Yi Li had no friendship with her and even had some animosity. Why would she help her cross out her name? Looking at Princess Ronghua stubbornly biting her lips and holding back her tears, Yi Li shook her head in her heart. Although she didn't like Princess Ronghua, she didn't hate her. Princess Ronghua was indeed domineering and arrogant, but at the same time, she was straightforward. At least she was easier to get along with than those women who were full of schemes. Princess, why did you come out of the city today? Did you come to beat me up to vent your anger? Do you want me to beat you up? Princess Ronghua asked. Yi Li smiled and shook her head. The porcelain cup in her hand shattered as she said indifferently, "You can't beat me." You! Princess Ronghua glared at her angrily. She felt that this woman was treating her like a monkey. Yi Li looked at her calmly and said, "The marriage cannot be changed. If Princess has the time to be angry with me, why don't you think about what to do in the future?" A trace of sadness and helplessness flashed in Princess Ronghua's eyes. She snorted and said, "What else can we do?" She was waiting to be escorted to the northern tribes. When the northern tribes and the Dechu state fall out, they will either be banished to the cold palace or used as a sacrifice. No matter how spoiled and willful she was still born into the royal family. It wasn't that she didn't know about the benefits involved, it was just that she didn't need them in the past. Yi Li's eyes flashed. She put the broken teacup back on the table and said, "Princess, if you go to the northern tribes, you will be the crown princess of the northern tribes. As long as the northern tribes and the Dechu state have not fallen out, no one will do anything to you. As long as you are smart enough, you can survive in the northern tribes. In the future, you may have a chance to return to the Dechu state." Princess Ronghua didn't believe her and snorted, "Return to the Dechu state? It's easy for you to say. When that time comes, who will remember a princess in a marriage alliance?" Yi Li frowned and thought for a while. She took out an exquisite jade pendant and handed it to Princess Ronghua. She said, "Princess, take this. In the future, if your life is in danger, the Ding Palace can save your life. This is a token. What do you want me to do?" Princess Ronghua was not a fool. Just as Yi Li said, their relationship was not good enough for Yi Li to help her. Yi Li said, "Take on the responsibility of a princess in a marriage alliance and the crown princess of the northern tribes. Do your best to assist the crown prince of the northern tribes." "I, assist the crown prince of the northern tribes? Are you kidding me?" Princess Ronghua still had some self-awareness of her own ability. She could be an ordinary princess, but to assist the crown prince. Wasn't Yi Li thinking too highly of her? Yi Li said lightly, "You don't have to worry. Since I have said so, I will help you. If you trust me, in the future, if someone comes to you with the other jade pendant, you just have to trust him. In addition, once you arrive at the northern tribes, you can reveal some information to the crown prince of the northern tribes. Let him believe that you can help him. Otherwise, you will be killed by him once you arrive. The crown prince of the northern tribes will not be happy to be the crown princess of the Dechu state." Princess Ronghua looked at Yi Li with a complicated expression. She was born in the royal family and was even older than Yi Li by 2 or 3 years, but she had never thought so much. Was this the difference between being the crown princess and being an ordinary princess? If the crown prince of the northern tribes knows that I have a relationship with the Prince Ding mansion, how can he trust me? Princess Ronghua asked. Yi Li smiled, "Find a way to let him know that you can help him deal with Yeluyi. When Xiao Yao sends you to the northern tribes, I will ask him to communicate with the crown prince." "Anne, why do you need the crown prince's trust? Do you really think that the northern tribes will accept a Dechu state as the future mother of the nation? Although the northern tribes is a barbarian land, they value bloodlines more than other places. For hundreds of years, the northern tribes have never sent a queen from a foreign country. There is also no king of the northern tribes who has the bloodline of the northern tribes. Of course, if you can really attract Yelu Hong to change everything for you, I can also change my plan to support you." Princess Ronghua frowned in disgust when she thought of the rumored northern tribes people who were detestable. Although that Yeluyi was not bad-looking, it was only not bad. There were thousands of men in Dechu state who were more handsome than him. Who knew what Yelu Hong looked like? That Yelu Ping from before was as ugly as a pig. Princess Ronghua took the jade in Yi Li's hand and said, "This is only a fair trade. Don't think that I will thank you." Yi Li pursed her lips and smiled, "No need to thank me. But princess should know that there are some things that cannot be known by too many people, right? I am not stupid. Princess Ronghua snorted coldly. Of course, she was not stupid. She knew that Yi Li was using her. But since ancient times, few princesses had good lives, let alone in a place like the northern tribes. At the very least, Yi Li had provided her with the means to survive. What did her cousin, who was high up in the palace, do? Other than sending people to teach her the etiquette that she had already learned, he did not even give her a word of advice. He only treated her as a flag that could be discarded at any time. Since that was the case, she could not be blamed for helping the Ding family. She also wanted to live. Yi Li nodded. There is still some time before departure. Princess, you should go and see Zhaoyang royal princess and the empress more often. Princess Ronghua was puzzled. Yi Li smiled and said, those two are smart people. If Princess sincerely asks for advice, they will teach you a lot. I don't know what Zhaoran royal princess taught you, but after so many years, you don't need to learn anymore, right? Princess Ronghua was not angry at Yi Li's blatant ridicule of her mother. Instead, she thought seriously for a moment and said, I know. I am leaving. Right, if you have nothing else to do, you should return to the capital early. Be careful that your Prince Ding is kidnapped. After that, Princess Ronghua walked out proudly, leaving Yi Li alone in the flower hall. She was stunned, wondering if Princess Ronghua was joking or if she was serious about something. Chapter 284. After seeing off Infanta Ronghua, Yi Li handed over the training plan to Qin Feng. The next morning, she went to say goodbye to Great Elder Princess and prepared to go back to the city. Great Elder Princess looked at Yi Li meaningfully and said with a smile, it's time to go back. You are the princess consort of the Ding state. How can you accompany me, an old woman, to live outside the city? What's more, it's always inconvenient for Xiaoyao without the help of a princess. Hearing Great Elder Princess's words, Yi Li was slightly stunned and increasingly felt that there was something in the capital that she didn't know. After saying goodbye to Great Elder Princess and going out, Yi Li saw Qin Feng standing at the door waiting for her. She glanced at him with a faint smile and asked, is there anything that I don't know about in the capital? Qin Feng's face froze and he said with a smile, if there is something important, who dares not to report it to you? Yi Li narrowed her eyes, tilted her head and looked at him with a smile, saying, so it's not very important? Tell me about it. Seeing Yi Li turn around and walk out, Qin Feng hurriedly followed her and said, in fact, it's not a big deal. Well, a few days ago, the envoy of the northern tribes for peace marriage arrived in the capital. Prince Yelu wrote to the emperor that since the two countries are united by marriage, there should be a marriage to show the friendship between the two countries. Yi Li looked back at him and said lightly, so this time, the princess of the northern tribes came and asked the prince to marry her, and she also asked the prince to marry her? What does the emperor think the king's mansion is? Why does he put all kinds of people in the mansion? Qin Feng shrank his neck. Was the princess really jealous? The prince would be very happy if he knew it, wouldn't he? Looking at Yi Li's expression, Qin Feng hurriedly explained, it's not the princess of the northern tribes. It's Helian Huimin, the adopted daughter of the winged cavalry general of the northern tribes, Helian Zhen. Yi Li couldn't help but twitch the corner of her mouth. Helian Zhen's goddaughter. Who didn't know that Helian Zhen and Ding King's residents had a deep hatred as deep as the ocean? And this goddaughter. It seemed that the other party was indeed very confident to dare to come to the Chu state with such an identity. Why didn't I know? Your Highness, please calm down. Qin Feng hurriedly asked for forgiveness. Yi Li glanced coolly at him. Qin Feng finally remembered that Wang Fei did not like her subordinates to say this kind of nonsense. He hurriedly explained, this is Prince's idea. The prince said that since your highness still has matters to attend to outside, there is no need to trouble your highness with such a small matter. The prince does not care about a mere northern tribeswoman. Yi Li nodded slightly to accept his explanation. She asked, if so, why did the whole city know about it? Princess Ronghua had been in the capital all this time. Even Great Elder Princess, who lived in seclusion outside the city, knew about it. It could not be said that this matter was not big. Qin Feng said, "The Emperor and the Empress Dowager said that Your Highness and Prince have been married for more than a year, but Your Highness has gone, there has been no news." So they approved Prince Yelu's request, saying that it is for the king's residents to have more children. After saying this, Qin Feng carefully glanced at Yi Li. This was the real reason why they did not dare to report it to the princess. What a good idea! Yi Li sneered, take a northern tribeswoman to have more children in the king's residence? Back to the city. She did not have racial prejudice. But even if she really could not have children, the people of the Chu state and the Mahist army would not accept that the future Prince Ding had the blood of the northern tribes in his body. This was purely a political issue. Mo Jingqi had a good idea. Did he really think that the people in the world were fools? Before returning to the king's residence, Yi Li heard many rumors about Prince Ding and Helian Huimin on the way. Among them, there was no lack of rumors about Princess Ding not being pregnant after being married for more than a year, but being unwilling to take a concubine for Prince Ding and being jealous and unvirtuous. As soon as they entered the king's residence, Director Mo hurried to invite Yi Li to the main hall. Yi Li raised her eyebrows in confusion. Director Mo explained, Prince Yelu and Miss Helian Huimin came to visit. Prince Ding is talking with them in the main hall. Since Your Highness is the madam of the king's residence, you should come out to greet the guests. Yi Li looked at Director Mo with interest and smiled, Uncle Mo, don't you have anything to say about the rumors outside? Although those messy speculations made Yi Li unhappy, there was one thing they were right about. She was not pregnant after being married for a year, and did not have any intention of taking a concubine for Mo Xiaoyao. In the eyes of the people of this era, she was indeed jealous and unvirtuous. Director Mo said calmly, how can a subordinate have the right to criticize a master's matters? Besides, most of the rumors outside were released by Prince Ding. And what does Prince Ding want to do? Yi Li was slightly surprised. Thinking about it seriously, it made sense. In just a few days, the rumors had spread all over the capital, and were even getting more and more intense. If the Prince Ding mansion had interfered, it would not have ended up like this. It seemed that Mo Xiaoyao not only did not eliminate these rumors, but also added fuel to the fire behind the scenes. Director Mo said, Prince Ding said that when Your Highness returns, you will naturally understand his intentions. Right now, Your Highness. Yi Li smiled brightly and said, since the other person has personally come to visit, how can this consort refuse? Just as she walked to the door of the main hall, she heard a clear young girl's voice from inside, Prince Ding, does Huimin have the fortune to see Your Highness? Mo Xiaoyao's voice was as light and gentle as usual as he said faintly, Li went out of the city to visit Imperial Aunt. I'm afraid that she has no fate to meet Miss Helian. Prince Ding is joking. How could there be no fate? When Huimin marries into Ding Qingfu, you and Your Highness will be sisters. There will naturally be a time to meet. Yelu Yi laughed loudly, Huimin, you don't need to be anxious. Princess Ding is gentle and elegant, and is the role model for women in the Chu state. She definitely won't make things difficult for you. Older cousin, you are right. Huimin has long admired Your Highness' reputation. Huimin was impatient and caused Your Highness to laugh. Helian Huimin laughed crisply. Her words were natural and unrestrained. She didn't have the slightest bit of shyness and panic when a daughter of the Chu state talked about her own marriage. Marry into Ding Qingfu? Mo Xiaoyao doubtfully asked, Ding Qingfu doesn't have any collateral branches. My father and brother have already passed away many years ago. Does Miss Helian have a marriage agreement with that ancestor of the Fu? Pfft. Yi Li couldn't help but laugh out loud. Mo Xiaoyao still pretended not to know about the rumors outside. His acting was a bit too heavy. Lightly coughing, only then did Yi Li walk into the hall. When Mo Xiaoyao saw Yi Li, he was obviously very happy. He personally got up and held Yi Li's hand as he smiled and said, Miss Li, you finally came back. Has your anger subsided and you're no longer angry with your husband? Yi Li faintly smiled and said, does Prince feel that he did something wrong? She secretly stretched out her hand and fiercely pinched Imo Xiaoyao. Yelu Yi, whose back was facing Helian Huimin, signaled with his eyes, "What the hell are you doing?" The strength of Yi Li's pinch was definitely not light. Imo Xiaoyao's body stiffened and his face fell as he said, "Is Miss Li still angry? I know that I was wrong. As long as wifey feels that something is wrong, then it is wrong. Even if the world says that something is right, then it is still their fault. Wifey, sit." His handsome face was still wearing half an ice-cold mask. In addition to the prestige of Prince Ding, this action of a husband coaxing his wife in an ordinary household was particularly strange in the eyes of outsiders. Helian Huimin and Yelu Yi couldn't help but look at each other in astonishment. They couldn't believe that Prince Ding would actually act like this in front of outsiders. Chapter 285. Yelu Yi raised his eyebrows with interest and smiled at Yi Li. "Wang Fei, long time no see. Wang Fei's elegance is still the same." Yi Li smiled and nodded. "Prince Yelu is also not to be outdone. This young lady is..." Without waiting for Yelu Yi to introduce her, Helian Huimin stood up and performed the Dechu State's curtsy to Yi Li, smiling. "Little sister Helian Huimin greets Wang Fei Jijia." Yi Li slightly frowned and leaned to the side to avoid this curtsy, smiling. "Miss Helian can call me Wang Fei. Speaking of which, Miss Helian should be older than me by a few years. I can't afford to be called Jijia." Yi Li finally saw Helian Huimin's appearance clearly. Because she was born from the northern tribes, Helian Huimin was much taller than the Dechu State's women. However, her figure was exquisite, without the slightest hint of the sturdiness of the northern tribes' women. On the contrary, her facial features were quite delicate, with a bit of the Dechu State's beauty. Only, she was dressed in the pink of the northern tribes' aristocratic attire. The smile on her face added a bit of valiance and formidableness. On the contrary, she was somewhat similar to Murong Ting. However, with a glance, Yi Li understood that this Helian Huimin was completely different from the unscheming Murong Ting. On the outside, the straightforward and bright appearance was only a disguise. Just by that pair of charming eyes that had been focused on her face, Yi Li knew that this unscheming appearance was only a cover-up in a situation where she still didn't know her background. Hearing Yi Li's words, Helian Huimin was slightly surprised, but quickly reacted with a smile. "Wang Fei Jijia may not know, but Huimin has already received the Dechu State's emperor's decree to marry into the Ding King's household in a few days. Although I don't know the rules of the Dechu State, in our northern tribes, the first to enter the door is the eldest. Therefore, it is only right for me to call you Jijia." Yi Li was silent for a moment. She turned her head to look at Imo Xiaoyao and said, "Prince, congratulations Prince, the emperor has personally bestowed upon you a beauty. Is Prince happy?" Imo Xiaoyao hurriedly shook his head. "Wife, you've misunderstood. I have never received any marriage decree. Just a moment ago, I was still pondering whether or not Miss Helian had an engagement with royal father or royal brother. As such, even though imperial father and imperial brother had passed away for a long time, the Ding Palace could still afford a ghost marriage. However, he would have to trouble his wife. I wonder, is Miss Helian I's concubine mother consort or little princess sister-in-law?" When these words came out, even someone as calm as Yelu Yi couldn't help but have a distorted expression. Although northern tribes women didn't care about trifles, Helian Huimin couldn't help but have an ugly expression on her face when she was teased by her own fiancé. "What do you mean you've never received a marriage decree? The emperor bestowed a marriage on the spot. He didn't even have time to write an imperial edict." In the end, Imo Xiaoyao swaggered off without the slightest intention of giving the emperor and the northern tribes any face. After that, he directly locked the person who delivered the imperial edict outside the door. Naturally, there was no marriage decree. Yi Li's clear eyes slightly raised. "Is that so?" Imo Xiaoyao sternly said, "This husband's feelings for Miss Li can be seen by the heavens. My words are definitely not false. If I were to disregard my honor and marry Miss Helian, then I would be punished to be struck by lightning and have no descendants. In any case, he absolutely wouldn't go to Helian Huimin. Naturally, there was no pressure in swearing an oath. Hearing this, Yi Li's expression softened a bit. She softly said, I believe you. What's the point of swearing an oath? Since that's the case, I'll let people prepare the wedding. However, in the end, is it royal father or eldest brother? Do you want me to ask eldest sister to come back? Not to mention that she ruined Helian Huimin's reputation, the people of the northern tribes didn't care much about this. Moreover, she didn't intend to be polite to a woman who wanted to steal her man. Mo Xiaoyao was obviously very satisfied with Yi Li's cooperation. He turned his head to look at Yelu Yi, who was sitting to the side. He clearly wanted him to clarify whether the person Helian Huimin wanted to marry was the former Prince Ding, or the former Prince Ding. Yelu Ye's face was ashen. Mo Xiaoyao had already linked marrying Helian Huimin with propriety, justice, integrity, and honor. It was obvious that he was determined to push Helian Huimin to a person who was already dead. If it really was as he wished, then they would suffer a double loss. Yelu Yi lightly snorted and said, Prince Ding, I think you also understand the intentions of I and the Dechu state's emperor. Don't you think it's improper for you to pester endlessly like this? Mo Xiaoyao was even more aggrieved than him. He lightly sighed and said, Prince may not know, but I's ancestors taught me to never marry a woman from another country. Otherwise, I wouldn't be worthy of being a descendant of the Ding Palace. But for the friendship between our two countries, imperial father and imperial brother have already passed away, but they won't be affected by the rules of the Prince Ding mansion. Isn't this the best of both worlds? Best of both worlds, my ass. Yelu Yi couldn't help but curse in his heart. Prince, Huimin wholeheartedly admires Prince. Why does Prince humiliate me like this? Helian Huimin stood up and looked at Mo Xiaoyao with hidden bitterness. Mo Xiaoyao indifferently said, I have no intention of humiliating Miss Helian. Helian Huimin said, since that's the case, why does Prince repeatedly refuse? You and I are the emperor of the Dechu state. Although I, Helian Huimin, am not born into the imperial family, I am still a noble of the northern tribes. I have studied literature and martial arts since childhood. I ask myself that I won't humiliate the prince. Mo Xiaoyao looked at Helian Huimin, then lowered his head to look at Yi Li sitting next to him. He softly said, I will only marry Miss Li in this life. What does Miss Helian's actions mean to I's beloved consort? The three people in the hall were startled. Helian Huimin looked at Yi Li with a complicated expression and said, Prince, for the sake of Princess, you don't even care about the Dechu state? Yi Li frowned and looked at Helian Huimin, what is Miss Helian saying? Could it be that if our prince doesn't marry Miss Helian, the northern tribes will send troops to invade our country? Helian Huimin naturally wouldn't mindlessly respond to such words. She only looked at Mo Xiaoyao and said, I heard that the Ding Palace has always been loyal to the imperial court. Could it be that Prince wants to disobey the imperial edict for the sake of Princess Ding? Prince, are you not afraid that the officials in the imperial court will think that Princess is someone who brings disaster to the country? Mo Xiaoyao's face slightly darkened, as if he had finally put away the playful smile from before. He indifferently looked at Helian Huimin and said, I see that Miss Helian's eloquence is not like that of a northern tribes person. Instead, it is like the people of our Dechu state, able to speak eloquently. Miss Helian, I only want to ask you a question. Helian Huimin stared blankly. Even though she didn't understand why Prince Ding, who had always been gentle no matter what she said 2 days ago, would suddenly become angry, she still nodded and said, Prince, please ask. At the side, Yelu Yi frowned and somewhat vigilantly stared at Mo Xiaoyao. He felt that whatever he said wouldn't be anything good. Mo Xiaoyao's gaze was cold as he stared at Helian Huimin's beautiful face until she turned her head away with a slight blush. Only then did he indifferently spit out a sentence, Miss Helian, are you unable to get married? The atmosphere in the hall instantly became heavy. Helian Huimin's still red face was filled with unconcealable astonishment. No matter to an unmarried woman, this sentence was definitely a deep humiliation. Yi Li looked at Mo Xiaoyao with some astonishment. She knew that Mo Xiaoyao's temper wasn't good, but he would never deliberately humiliate a woman. Even that impudent Princess Lingyun from Xiling last year, he also didn't say such harsh words. But as a woman and a wife, Yili couldn't help but admit that when Mo Xiaoyao treated Helian Huimin so heartlessly, a trace of sweetness emerged in her heart. Chapter 286. Prince Ding, you've gone too far. Yelu Ye's face darkened as he stared at Mo Xiaoyao. Mo Xiaoyao glanced at him and smiled faintly. Where did Prince Yelu's words come from? Huimin was willing to marry into the Chu state for the sake of diplomatic relations between the two countries. Prince, even if you don't like my northern militant's noble daughter, you shouldn't humiliate her like this. I will report this matter to your country's emperor and will definitely seek justice for Huimin. Yelu Yi said with righteous indignation. Justice? Mo Xiaoyao raised his eyebrows and said with ridicule, I still want to seek justice. In the throne room, I already personally rejected the marriage decree. I also repeatedly stated that the Ding King's mansion only has one mistress. Prince Yelu and this Miss Helian have repeatedly come to disturb us, even slandering and driving a wedge between us in front of Ai's beloved wife. Could it be that Prince Yelu doesn't know how important the mistress of the Ding King's mansion is? If Miss Li and I become hostile because of this, who can I find to reason with? If it was a woman from the Chu state, she would naturally retreat after being implicitly rejected. However, not only have you two visited every day, you've also spread rumors everywhere to ruin Miss Li's reputation. I can't help but suspect that Miss Helian was forced to marry into the northern militant's mansion because she couldn't get married. The Ding King's mansion only has one mistress. If Miss Helian insists on staying, it wouldn't be a problem for her to be a rough cleaning maid. Miss Helian can't be a first-class maid. The worst of the Prince Ding mansion's first-class maids are all educated and courteous pure girls. Prince Ding, you. Helian Huimin seemed to have recovered from the blow just now. Hearing Mo Xiaoyao's words, she was so angry that her face flushed red. Even her pair of beautiful eyes were rolling with sparkling and translucent tears. However, she didn't retreat or cry because of this. Instead, she turned her face to Yili. Since Princess Consort received Prince Ding's favor, don't tell me you don't want to say something? Or will Princess Consort only hide behind Prince Ding and enjoy the fruits of others' labor? Yili sighed in her heart. This girl really wasn't simple. If a normal girl was humiliated so brazenly by a man like this, even if she didn't immediately run away in tears, she would have sobbed. But this Miss Helian not only wasn't defeated, she actually still had the strength to retaliate. Blinking her eyes, Yili smiled innocently. Miss Helian, isn't it natural for a man to protect a woman? With His Highness around, this consort naturally doesn't need to worry. This Fei and His Highness are in love with each other and do not want anyone else to come between us. Asking Miss Helian to help us. It's common sense for a man to have 3 wives and 4 concubines. Your De Chu state also requires women to be virtuous and virtuous. Princess Consort, aren't you afraid of being criticized by others for saying such words? Yelu Yi asked. Yi Li smiled. Our De Chu state requires women to understand etiquette, justice, integrity and shame. A woman who takes the initiative to ask for marriage is absolutely not acceptable. What's more, this consort doesn't like Prince Ding taking concubines. Whoever wants to criticize, just criticize. Helian Huimin clearly didn't expect that Yili wasn't the slightest bit different from other women in the Chu state. Unexpectedly, she was so difficult to deal with on this issue. She gritted her teeth and said, isn't Princess Consort afraid that the Emperor will blame the Ding King Fu? Blame? Yili's elegant brows slightly knitted. Just when others thought she was about to waver, she lightly bit her teeth and said, in a moment, this consort will enter the palace to ask for forgiveness. Miss Helian, no, anyone who wants to marry into the Ding King Fu is fine. This consort will slit her throat with a sword and give up the position of Princess Consort. At that time, Prince Ding can marry whoever he wants. Finished speaking, she raised her head to look at Mo Xiaoyao and asked, Prince, what do you say? Mo Xiaoyao's originally malicious expression instantly faded. He didn't care that there were still two outsiders in front of him. He pulled Yili into his embrace and said with a smile, "Beloved consort, you mustn't. If beloved consort is hurt in the slightest, I will feel the same way. At that time, I can only crush those bastards who hurt beloved consort to eliminate the hatred in my heart." Yili nodded her head in satisfaction. She turned her head to look at Helion Huimin and said, "Miss Helion, you've seen it. Even if this consort dies, Prince Ding will not marry you." Helion Huimin still wanted to say something but was stopped by Yeluyi. Yeluyi stood up and said, "Since it's like this, I'll have to disturb Prince and Princess Consort today. This one will take his leave first. I won't see you out." Mo Xiaoyao said indifferently. After sending off the two eyesores, Yili turned her head to size up Mo Xiaoyao. She said with a smile that wasn't a smile, "To have such a beauty's favor, Prince Ding's luck with women is really not shallow." Mo Xiaoyao looked at her helplessly. "To I, only Miss Li is a beauty. This is trouble that came out of nowhere." Yili frowned and said, "Why didn't the northern tribes mention this so-called political marriage before? Just look at how busy the Ministry of Rights has been these 2 months to prepare for the political marriage between the two countries. How could there be someone like Helion Huimin who directly delivered herself to their doorstep? Saying it was a political marriage was more like child's play." Mo Xiaoyao said, "Yeluyi only mentioned it after the northern tribe's political marriage envoy arrived in the capital. It shouldn't be the king of the northern tribe's idea, but rather Yeluye's own impromptu idea." Yili didn't understand. Impromptu idea? If he wants to plant a spy in the Prince Ding mansion, isn't it a bit too obvious? Mo Xiaoyao smiled and said, "Plant a spy? Yeluyi wouldn't do something that he knows is impossible. Even if he wanted to do it, he wouldn't do it so substandard. He just wants to make a big fuss and cause a bit of trouble for I, that's all. In any case, that Helion Huimin is only Helion Zhen's adopted daughter. Who knows what her background is? Whether she's crippled or dead, it won't be a loss to him." Yili lightly snorted and said, "Since it's like this, Prince, why don't you explain what the rumors in the capital are about?" Mo Xiaoyao smiled and said, "Are you talking about the rumors that Li is unvirtuous? I had people spread those rumors. So Prince has been dissatisfied with me for a long time?" Yili glanced at him and said lightly. Mo Xiaoyao smiled and said, "How could that be? I love my beloved concubine so much that she's unvirtuous." Yili raised her eyebrows. "When we return to the palace, you should be looking for me to talk, right? Li, feel free to go. If there's anything, just push it to me. I want the whole world to know that even if the chosen concubine isn't virtuous, she's still I's only beloved concubine." Mo Xiaoyao said in a low voice as he lightly hugged Yili's slender waist. Yili was silent. She leaned against Mo Xiaoyao's chest and slowly calmed the waves in her heart. The news from the palace came very quickly. It didn't even wait for the next day before someone came to summon Yili into the palace. The two people who were admiring the flowers in the garden didn't find it strange. Since there was such a show of marriage, how could the palace not respond? Mo Xiaoyao put down the brush he was painting and prepared to enter the palace with Yili. However, Yili reached out and pushed him back. "The Empress Dowager is summoning me into the palace. What are you going to do?" Mo Xiaoyao smiled and said, "Could it be that if the Empress Dowager doesn't summon I can't enter the palace?" Yili smiled coldly and said, "They want to talk to me, but you have to go. If they can't say anything this time, won't they have to spend time looking for me next time? Since it's like this, it's better to let them say it all at once. I want to see what they have to say." Speaking of this point, Yili was extremely depressed. She thought that she had married a husband that no one would come to steal. In the end, look at this year. First there was that Princess Lingyun, and then there was that cousin noble consort Lu that Mo Xiaoyao had thrown out of the city. Now there was a Miss Helion. Did these women have nothing better to do, or was it that Mo Xiaoyao's face wasn't ruined enough? Chapter 287. Finding that Yi Li's gaze was fixed on his face, Mo Xiaoyao innocently rubbed his brows and said with a smile, since it's like this, Yi Li, be careful. Also, stay away from that Yi Lu Yi. Yi Li blinked in surprise and looked in confusion at Mo Xiaoyao. Mo Xiaoyao was embarrassed by her gaze. With a soft snort, he pulled her into his embrace and lowered his head to bite her red lips, saying, in short, stay away from him. Yi Li smiled, Prince is jealous? Mo Xiaoyao didn't hide it and nodded, replying, that's right, so Wang Fei has to keep a distance from him. N. Yi Li withdrew from his embrace and covered her mouth to laugh, Prince, it's not good to be jealous. Without waiting for Mo Xiaoyao to respond, she had already turned and quickly walked away. Mo Xiaoyao gave a helpless laugh. With such an outstanding wife, how could he not be jealous? If it was possible, he even hoped that Li wouldn't go anywhere and wouldn't do anything. She would just stay in the Fu and accompany him every day. It was a pity that he knew this wasn't possible. Not only was the situation and the status of the Ding Wang Fu not allowing it, Li wasn't someone that anyone could truly bind. Watching Yi Li's figure disappear at the end of the corridor, the smile on Mo Xiaoyao's face gradually faded and was slowly dyed with a layer of killing intent. Political marriage, bestowed marriage. Did Yi Lu Yi think he didn't know what he was planning? Yi Lu Yi, offending I isn't a good idea. It seems that Yi Lu Ping's lesson wasn't enough for you to remember. Come. Prince. Reply to the person Yi Lu Hong sent. I agree to his proposal. Yes, Prince. Zhengde Palace was still as magnificent as before, but Yi Li knew that ever since Li Wang's rebellion, the Empress Dowager's power in the palace had been suppressed by the emperor. However, although the Empress Dowager favored Prince Li, she was still the emperor's biological mother. The Chu state prioritized filial piety. Even if the mother and son were at odds, the emperor still had to give the Empress Dowager superficial respect. Stepping into Zhengde Palace once again, Yi Li's state of mind was much calmer than before. Yi Li greets the Empress Dowager and the Empress. Stepping into the hall, Yi Li lightly bent her knees to greet the Empress Dowager and the Empress. Princess Ding, there's no need for formalities. Please take a seat, the Empress said softly. Yi Li gave her thanks and walked to the empty seat at the front. She looked with slight confusion at the noblewomen sitting in the hall and the calm Helian Huiman sitting across from her. Yi Li couldn't help but admire this woman. At this time, her face didn't have the embarrassment and resentment she had when she left the Ding Palace. Even the gaze she used to look at her was very calm and dignified. What day is it today? Why is everyone here? Is it this consort who came late? When one's status reached a certain level, one didn't need to be so restrained when speaking. With Yi Li's status, as long as she wasn't stupid enough to say that she wanted to rebel, even if she said something wrong, no one would dare to say that she was wrong. The Empress smiled and said, "You're not late. I am in the palace. Didn't I just arrive?" The Northern Tribe's envoy sent some Northern Tribe specialties to Mohu. Mohu wanted to invite everyone to try it. It's just that you haven't been in the capital all the time. Mohu just came back today, so Mohu ordered us to gather at Zhengde Palace. Yi Li smiled and said, "Thank you for your concern, Empress Dowager. I went to Imperial Aunt's place to stay for a few days." The Empress didn't seem to say anything, but Yi Li understood her meaning. The Empress nodded almost indiscernibly. She smiled slightly and turned her head to talk to the concubines beside her. The Empress Dowager smiled faintly and said, "You usually don't like to enter the palace. I have to take this opportunity to invite you to come in and gather with everyone. How is Great Elder Princess? Imperial Aunt is in good health. Empress Dowager, thank you for your concern." Yi Li smiled faintly and thanked her. A warm gaze fell on Yi Li. Yi Li smiled faintly and gave Madame Su, who was worried about her, a comforting smile. However, she sneered in her heart. These people had a good plan. Did they think that she would agree to their request because of her status? She calmly withdrew her gaze. Yi Li looked up and saw another gaze falling on her. Different from Madame Su's worried gaze, this gaze was extremely complicated and resentful. Without looking, she knew that it was noble consort Lu, who was sitting on the other side of the Empress Dowager. These days, not only the Empress Dowager became haggard and older, but also noble consort Lu changed a lot. There seemed to be something else in her original indifference, which made the woman, who was as cold as a pear blossom, a little unpredictable. Yili nodded slightly to her, but she just pretended not to see it and just stared at Yili. Her gaze made Yili a little uncomfortable and she frowned. Princess Ding, Miss Hellion will be a member of King Ding's mansion from now on. Miss Hellion came from the northern tribes. Princess Ding, you should treat her well. As expected, the Empress Dowager said with a smile before she sat down and said a few words with others. That look and that tone was so natural that it was as if the matter of Prince Ding rejecting the marriage did not happen at all. Yili didn't plan to be polite. She didn't want to help Mo Xiaoyao send away the concubines who sent themselves to his door. Putting down the teacup in her hand, Yili blinked and asked doubtfully, Miss Hellion? Is the Empress Dowager saying that Miss Hellion agreed to be a cleaning maid in King Ding's mansion? Don't worry, the Prince Ding mansion never bullies the servants. This consort also won't casually argue with the servants. Cleaning maid? Even the experienced Empress Dowager couldn't help but be stunned and asked in confusion. Yili smiled and looked at Hellion Huimin and asked doubtfully, isn't it? Previously, Prince Yelu and Miss Hellion made it clear in front of me and Prince Yelu that he agreed to let Miss Hellion enter the mansion to be a cleaning maid. Now that the Empress Dowager mentioned it, isn't it the same thing? Did this consort misunderstand? The Empress Dowager choked and said seriously, Princess Ding is joking. With Miss Hellion's status, how can she be a rough servant? Yili was puzzled. Status? Is she General Hellion's goddaughter? Being a rough servant with this status is indeed a waste. However, our prince said so. Although I'm a consort, I can't disobey the prince's wishes. I'm afraid that Miss Hellion and our King Ding's mansion don't have any fate. The Empress Dowager could naturally see that this was Yili's excuse. She frowned and said, Princess Ding, how can you speak nonsense about the marriage that was bestowed by His Majesty? Just now, His Majesty asked Ijia to ask Princess Consort when King Ding's mansion plans to hold the wedding. It's best to do it before the Northern Tribe's envoy leaves. What plans do you have? Yili pursed her lips into a smile and said indifferently, reporting to the Empress Dowager, King Ding's mansion doesn't plan to hold a wedding. Once these words were spoken, the main hall suddenly became silent. Almost everyone's gaze gathered on Yili's body. Among them, the most intense were Hellion Huimin and noble consort Lu. Hellion Huimin probably didn't think that she would dare to refuse the marriage in front of all the noble women and the Empress Dowager in the palace. As a result, she couldn't get off the tiger. If King Ding's mansion insisted on not marrying Hellion Huimin, then her face would be completely lost. Meeting Hellion Huimin's eyes that contained anger and shock, Yili responded with a shallow smile. It couldn't be that she was usually too gentle, so this Miss Hellion thought that she didn't dare to refuse the marriage in front of everyone, right? Chapter 288. Princess Ding, what did you say? The Empress Dowager frowned and stared at Yili unhappily. In fact, the Empress Dowager now did not want to have any involvement with the Ding Palace. When her youngest son did not even give her a greeting and started a rebellion, causing her to fall into a dilemma, she understood that this son was unreliable. As a woman in the palace, without a son to rely on, even if she had the ability to overturn the heavens, it would be a waste. Although her power had been taken away, the Empress had always been respectful to her, so she only wanted to enjoy her old age in the palace. Unfortunately, even if she wanted to retreat, her emperor son did not want her to. So after Mo Jingqi was rebuffed by Mo Xiaoyao, he pulled her out, hoping to start with Ding Wangfei. The Empress Dowager was now an outsider and could see more clearly. She naturally understood that this Princess Ding was not someone who could be led by the nose. Although she did not want to offend Yili, she had no choice now and could no longer stay out of the matter. Yili smiled and glanced at Madame Su, who was not far away. She turned back to look at the Empress Dowager, her voice clear and firm. Empress Dowager, the Ding family has no plans to hold a wedding. In fact, as long as I am still Princess Ding, the prince will not marry any concubines. The hall was in an uproar. Ding Princess, how dare you? Princess Xiaoran suddenly stood up and pointed at Yi Li as a woman. You dare to stop Prince Ding from marrying a concubine. You have no virtue as a woman. How can such a jealous woman be a good match for Prince Ding? Princess Xiaoran's only beloved daughter was sent to the northern tribes for a political marriage. Her heart was filled with anger, and she was usually dissatisfied with Yi Li, and naturally, she was the first to stand up and make things difficult for her. Yi Li lazily glanced at Princess Xiaoran. It seemed that Princess Xiaoran disliked her from the start. No, it should be said that Princess Xiaoran disliked Mo Xiaoyao, so she disliked her as well. Normally, Yi Li wouldn't mind if she gave in, but today's matter wasn't something she could let go of. Therefore, Yi Li did not plan on apologizing to her. With a faint smile, Yi Li said, "Eldest princess should be careful with your words. Our family's prince is not willing to take a concubine. As a wife, this consort naturally has to follow her husband's lead. Could it be that I need an outsider to force the prince? Since Princess Royal speaks of womanly virtues, do you know that a married woman should obey her husband?" Princess Zhao Ren's face alternated between green and white. Who in the capital didn't know that Princess Zhao Ren couldn't give birth to a son and that she controlled the prince consort and prohibited him from getting close to the concubines? That was why the prince consort didn't have a son even though he was 40 years old this year. Fortunately, the prince consort was only the second son of the first wife. If it was the eldest grandson, even the eldest princess would not be able to suppress the dissatisfaction of the aristocratic families. At this moment, the words of virtue coming out of her mouth sounded a bit sarcastic. Princess Xiaoran gave a snort with a calm face and said, "Even if it's like this, as the Ding King's princess, you should think of the Prince Ding Mansion's children and help the King's mansion spread its branches. Even if the prince was confused and refused to take a concubine, as the princess, if you don't know how to persuade him, you can't be called virtuous." Yi Li looked up and said with a faint smile, "When did this consort say that I could be called virtuous? If being a virtuous consort means finding a beautiful concubine for my husband when I have nothing to do, then I'm sorry, this consort is not virtuous and does not plan on being virtuous." You. Princess Xiaoran was so angry that she couldn't think straight. She pointed at Yi Li with a trembling finger and couldn't say anything for a while. Yi Li did not avoid it and raised her brows at her with a smile. The empress in the hall saw that the eldest princess was about to faint from anger and a trace of a smile appeared in her eyes. She said, "All right, if you have something to say, just say it. Eldest princess, don't be angry. Princess Ding, the elders have taught you not to be rude." Yi Li nodded and respectfully said, "The matter of the empress's teachings, Yi Li will definitely remember the elders' teachings and follow the eldest princess' example. I won't dare to disobey." The Empress Dowager frowned and lightly coughed. She looked at Yi Li and said, "Princess Ding, this time, the Emperor bestowing Miss Helian's marriage is both a family matter and a national matter. Princess Ding should prioritize national matters and cannot be willful." Yi Li's heart couldn't help but be angry. What was going on with these people? If it was the men themselves who were unfaithful, then it would be fine. These women were also unwilling to stop stuffing women into other people's food. They were clearly forcing the men to be unfaithful. They themselves liked virtuous and virtuous women. She didn't love them. Did they have to drag her along? Yi Li stood up and coldly said, "The Empress Dowager is joking. How can a marriage between two countries be so careless? At the time of the marriage, the king of the northern tribes never mentioned sending people to marry with the Ding royal family. If it really is a national matter, then where is the letter of credence for the northern tribes' marriage? If there isn't a letter of credence, then is it a private decision made by some people? What kind of place does the Empress Dowager think the Ding royal family is? Is it a place where anyone can enter as they wish? If Miss Helian wants to enter the Ding royal family, you can. The Prince Ding Mansion's sweeping maid position is waiting for you. You want to enter the Prince Ding mansion with an insignificant status as a goddaughter? Miss Hellion, first give me a clear status before speaking to the imperial consort. Hellion Huimin stood up, her elegant face full of anger. Even if you are the Ding royal consort, this lady is still a noble lady of the northern tribes. How can I allow you to wantonly humiliate me? Noble lady of the northern tribes? Yili disdainfully raised her eyebrows. The imperial consort. I still haven't heard that the noble lady's identity is So-and-so's goddaughter. A noble lady who can't even reveal the background of her biological parents? Everyone present understood the meaning behind Yili's words. In the Dechu state, even if the status of a godfather was much higher than one's biological parents, when speaking to others, one must first mention one's biological parents. At most, one would add the phrase so-and-so's goddaughter at the end. However, Hellion Huimin completely didn't mention the identity of her biological parents. This could only prove that the status of Hellion Huimin's parents wasn't as simple as being ordinary. It should be extremely low. Thinking about some of the customs of the northern tribes, there weren't many nobles of the northern tribes who looked as dignified as Yi. Most of the nobles of the northern tribes didn't look good in the eyes of the Dechu state's aesthetic standards. On the contrary, those who looked good in the northern tribes were mostly slaves. In other words, those who were sold or captured from other countries to the northern tribes. Among them, many were the descendants of the Dechu state's people. Thus, Hellion Huimin didn't even mention the identity of her biological parents. It couldn't help but make people suspect that she was the descendant of the slaves of the northern tribes. If that was really the case, even if the Ding king's household really married her as a concubine, it would be a huge joke. The noblewomen's gazes towards Hellion Huimin couldn't help but become subtle. In that subtle gaze, there was an additional bit of disgust and contempt. The status of the slaves of the northern tribes and the servants of the Dechu state were even lower. Not only were they killed at will, but they also specialized in doing some rough work that normal people weren't willing to do. Furthermore, there was no such thing as moonlighting. Many female slaves were also played with and abused by their masters. Hellion Huimin was also an extremely intelligent person. How could she not notice the changes in the gazes of the people present? She looked at Yili with even more resentment in her eyes. The Empress Dowager hesitantly looked at Hellion Huimin. She also didn't know what Hellion Huimin's true identity was. If that was really the case, if Hellion Huimin's true identity was spread out, it would only cause the entire court to be dissatisfied with the emperor's decree for the marriage. It would even cause the military to think that the emperor was purposely trying to humiliate the Ding king's household. Princess consort, I'm afraid you filtered it out. Since the northern tribes and our Dechu state are on good terms, they naturally wouldn't not understand our Dechu state's customs. The girl sent over for the marriage naturally has a noble status. Presumably, Miss Hellion's parents died when she was young and she grew up in the General Hellion household, so she's used to it? Chapter 289. Yili originally didn't intend to bite Hellion Huimin's identity to death. If Hellion Huimin's background was really unbearable, it wouldn't be good for the Ding palace if it was spread out. Standing up, Yili glanced at Hellion Huimin and raised her head to look directly at the Empress Dowager. Empress Dowager, this consort will say it clearly here. Unless the prince personally agrees to take a secondary consort, this consort will not agree to let anyone enter. The Empress Dowager was secretly annoyed. If Prince Ding's side could do it, why would they need to find Princess Ding to talk so much nonsense? Princess Ding, the Emperor's imperial edict has already been issued. Don't you know what an imperial order is? Don't tell me you still want the Emperor to go back on his words? Yili smiled and raised her head. Then there is only one way. Asking the Emperor and Empress Dowager to issue an edict to kill this consort. Without this consort, the position of Wang Fei will be empty. The prince can naturally take a secondary consort. At that time, this consort won't be able to control who the prince marries. Princess Ding. The Empress Dowager was furious. Yi Li's expression was solemn and didn't change. The Empress Dowager angrily sneered, "What if I must let Miss Hellion enter?" A faint smile flitted across Yi Li's face and a cold light appeared in her hand. Then the Empress Dowager wouldn't mind the Ding Palace's wedding and funeral being held together. This consort guarantees that the funeral will be more lively than the wedding. Everyone present couldn't help but suck in a breath of cold air. Looking at the cold light of the dagger in Princess Ding's hand, a few people who originally had other thoughts extinguished the delusions in their hearts. Even if it was a concubine's daughter who wasn't well liked, marrying into a family with a slightly inferior background would still be of some help to the family. If she married into the Ding Palace, not only would she offend Princess Ding, she would also have sinned for no reason. Looking at the woman who still had a gentle smile in front of them, they didn't dare to doubt that she was just joking. Yi Li smiled and swept her gaze across everyone. Her gaze stopped on Helian Huimin and smiled. How is it? Does Miss Helian still insist on entering the Prince Ding mansion? Helian Huimin took a deep breath and looked at Yi Li, unwilling to admit defeat. Princess Consort wants to kill me, but I'm afraid you don't have the ability. Do you think a mere dagger can scare me? Which daughter of the northern tribes did not grow up wielding swords and knives on horseback? Although Helian Huimin's family background was a bit low, she had been adopted by Helian Jin since she was a child. Naturally, her martial arts were not weak. With a flip of his hand, he also pulled out his scimitar from its jeweled scabbard and pointed it at Yi Li. Miss Helian, how can you casually draw your blade in front of the Empress Dowager? Quickly put it down. The Empress frowned and reprimanded. On the side, noble consort Lu said lightly, just now, when Princess Ding drew her sword, Her Majesty didn't reprimand her. The Empress smiled faintly and said, younger sister, have you forgotten that our ancestors have instructed Prince Ding and Princess Ding to carry swords in the palace? Noble consort Lu snorted and turned her head away, ignoring the Empress. The Empress also did not argue with her and smiled faintly. Looking at Helian Huimin, who was holding the gorgeously decorated scimitar, Yi Li pursed her lips and smiled. Helian Huimin frowned and said, what are you smiling about? Yi Li smiled and said, speaking of which. There are quite a few women who are eyeing my prince covetously. Today, consort, I will use you as an example. Shameless boasting. Helian Huimin sneered disdainfully and waved the scimitar in her hand towards Yi Li. Yi Li casually moved to the side, but Helian Huimin did not relax and continued to wave the scimitar from behind her. Helian Huimin was indeed a woman who grew up in the grasslands. Compared to the women of the Central Plains, her scimitar was vigorous and full of strength. Yi Li waited until she had waved the scimitar a dozen times before she laughed crisply and said, is Miss Helian done? Next, it's consort I's turn. Compared to Helian Huimin's majestic aura, Yi Li's moves were extremely ordinary. The crowd didn't even understand what was going on. They only saw Yi Li already closing in on Helian Huimin, one hand grabbing Helian Huimin's retreating hand, and with a kick, kicking away Helian Huimin's kick. Her other hand flashed a cold light and mercilessly stabbed towards Helian Huimin's chest. Princess Ding, have mercy! The Empress Dowager and the Empress shouted in unison. Helian Huimin found that she could not break free from Yi Li's grip and could only close her eyes and wait for death. She was not reconciled. She believed that her martial arts were the best among the women of the northern tribes, but she had lost to a woman from the Dechu state. She did not even have time to see her moves clearly, but this was not important. Even if she was not reconciled to her loss, what awaited her was death. After waiting for a while, the expected pain did not come. Helian Huimin opened her eyes in confusion and saw that Yi Li had unceremoniously pushed her to the side and calmly put away the scimitar in her hand. Helian Huimin had walked through the gates of hell, but she was still somewhat in a daze. She could feel that Princess Ding did not just want to scare her. That murderous aura that hit her in the face was enough for her to clearly understand that she had just narrowly escaped with her life. After receiving such a blow, Helian Huimin could not say anything for a while. She could only stand in the hall in a daze. The Empress Dowager's face was green with anger. She stood up and said, Princess Ding, you have big guts. Forget it. Aijia is old, I can't manage these things. Empress, I'll leave the rest to you. Aijia will go back first. After speaking, the Empress Dowager rubbed her chest and called for the palace maids beside her to help her leave. The Empress Dowager gave up and the Empress could only bitterly smile. Noble Consort Lu looked at the Empress and asked, "Empress, how should we deal with this?" The Empress smiled and said, "Naturally, we will report to the Emperor and then make a decision. But after today, I think this matter will not be difficult to solve." Younger sister, don't you think so? If Helianhuimen still dared to want to marry into the Ding Prince's mansion, then she could only admire her. Noble Consort Lu lowered her head to look at Yi Li, who was below His Highness. Her eyes were more complex and deep. The Empress ignored her and only smiled and said, "I still like Princess Ding's temperament. She doesn't make a sound, but she amazes everyone with a single brilliant feat. She handles things cleanly and efficiently." Presumably, those who want to marry their daughters into the Prince Ding mansion will have to think twice. Facing Yi Li, who was below His Highness, she smiled faintly. Her eyes were filled with envy and admiration. Yi Li, who was under everyone's gaze, played with the sharp blade in her hand without care. Since this kind of matter could not be settled, then it would be settled cleanly once and for all. When they left Zhangde Palace, the noble ladies looked at Yi Li with a strange expression. There was envy, jealousy, fear, and schadenfreude in their eyes. Not to mention that the Dechu state had been founded for more than 100 years, even in the past several thousand years, there was no woman who dared to draw a blade in front of the Empress Dowager and Empress and say that she would kill all the women who wanted to be her husband's concubine. This boldness and courage naturally made these noble women who had to endure groups of concubines at home envious and jealous. At the same time, everyone knew that being chosen as the king's consort meant that she was destined to bear the infamy of being a jealous woman. Yi Li had just stepped out of the hall when Su Furen was already waiting outside. Yi Li smiled faintly and greeted her, "Aunt." Su Furen looked at her and sighed. She shook her head and said, "You girl." Yi Li lowered her head and smiled, "Li has embarrassed Aunt." Chapter 290. Lady Su pulled her hand and laughed softly as she walked out. Why would our Su family care about these false reputation? Aunt is also a woman, how can you not understand a woman's thoughts? But Prince Ding sighed. Lear was indeed daring in the palace today, but with her status as the imperial consort, she wouldn't be charged with any serious crime. The so-called marriage was a family matter. As long as Prince Ding was willing to protect her, she would be fine. But if Prince Ding was dissatisfied with her actions today, then Lear's future days would not be easy. Yi Li blinked and looked at Lady Su's worried eyes. She hugged Lady Su's arm and intimately leaned on her with a smile, "Aunt, don't worry. I'll be fine. Aunt, when you go back, you have to put in a good word for Lear in front of second uncle, lest second uncle wants to teach Lear a lesson." Lady Su raised her hand to pat her and laughed softly, "You're too daring. No wonder your uncle wants to teach you a lesson. Just now in the palace, you scared me quite a bit." Lady Su came from a scholarly family and had never seen anyone brandish a sword in front of her. Just now in the palace, when she saw Helianhuimen brandishing a sword towards Yi Li, if it wasn't for her usual self-control, she would have screamed on the spot. Leah knows her mistake. I won't do it in the future. Yi Li hugged Lady Su's arm and acted coquettishly. Just as she accompanied Lady Su out of the palace gate, she saw the curtain of the Ding Palace's carriage being opened from the inside. A handsome man in a white gown stepped out of the carriage with his head lowered and smiled at Yi Li at the palace gate, "Lear." Although the noblewomen passing by could not stop and watch, they also saw Prince Ding smiling and reaching out his hand to the princess consort. They didn't believe that Prince Ding didn't know what happened in the palace. It seemed that Prince Ding only had the princess consort in his heart. Even though Princess Ding made such a domineering and willful declaration in the palace, which almost made Prince Ding lose face, Prince Ding still doted on her as before. Madame Su pulled Yi Li forward and bowed. Mo Xiaoyao stepped aside slightly and said with a laugh, "Madame is Yi Li's Jomu, we're family, there's no need to be so courteous." Madame Su laughed and said, "Etiquette must not be discarded." Yi Li is young and immature, I hope that Prince will be magnanimous enough to forgive her. Mo Xiaoyao looked at Yi Li with a smile and said, Madam worries too much, Li is very good. Why are you here? Yi Li asked, puzzled. Mo Xiaoyao laughed in a low voice and said, I heard that Nyangzi drew her saber in Zhangde Palace and was so angry that it shocked everyone. Isn't your husband worried about your safety? Yi Li couldn't help but roll her eyes at him. If he was worried about her safety, why didn't he enter the palace to find her? Who was he putting on an act for? Madame Su looked at the two's conversation and there was a trace of relief in her eyes. With one glance, she could see that Prince Ding really didn't care about Li Er's actions in the palace, and it could even be said that he was very happy about it. With a smile, Madame Su bid farewell to the two and walked towards her own carriage with a peace of mind. When the Prince Ding mansion's carriage left, the palace gate gradually regained its peace. Not far from the city walls, Yilu Yi brought Helian Huimin and silently watched the Ding mansion's carriage leave. After a long time, Helian Huimin said with some unwillingness, Cousin, are we just going to let it go like this? Yilu Yi glanced at her with a smile that wasn't a smile and said, if we don't let it go, what can you do? You can't hook up with Prince Ding, and you can't deal with the Prince Ding mansion. Or do you really want to go to the Ding mansion to be a cleaning maid? Don't forget what happened to 11 because of Mo Xiaoyao. Do you think he's a soft-hearted person? Thinking of the 11th Prince Yilu Ping who was still a fool, Helian Huimin couldn't help but shiver. She didn't dare to think about how a person who wasn't injured or poisoned would turn from a normal person into a fool. How much inhumane torture did Yilu Ping suffer? And all of this was because Yilu Ping said something that shouldn't be said at Mo Xiaoyao's wedding. Then, what should we do now? Helian Huimin asked with some worry. Yilu Yi didn't care and said, of course we wait to welcome the princess back to the northern tribes. But Helian Huimin frowned. Yilu Yi lightly said, marrying you into the Ding mansion was originally a spur-of-the-moment decision. The success rate is less than 30%, and this 30% still depends on the Ding country's princess consort. Now it seems that there isn't even a 5% chance. You should go back to the northern tribes and obediently be the crown prince's concubine. Helian Huimin's face changed greatly and said in panic, no, cousin, the crown prince will kill me. Also, what happened in the Dechu state will definitely spread back to the northern tribes. The crown prince won't want me. The crown prince's concubine, the northern tribes and the Dechu state's rules and etiquette were completely different. The concubines below the crown prince's concubine would all become the crown prince's concubine, but all of them were the crown prince's concubine's slaves. If her status was noble and her birth was noble, then it would be better. But for a woman who was born a slave, even if she became the crown prince's concubine, she still wasn't allowed to have children. She also wasn't allowed to have her own property and had no freedom. Other than when the crown prince was having sex, she was no different from an ordinary female slave. Even if she was beaten to death, as her adoptive father, Helian Jin couldn't say anything. What's more, the crown prince and Yilu Ye's party had a deep grudge. The women who were sent to the crown prince's mansion by Yilu Yi would usually be sent out in less than half a month. Helian Huimin couldn't help but tremble in her dreams at night. So this time, when Yilu Yi came to the Dechu state to escort the bride, she thought of a way to follow. When Yilu Yi said that he planned to send her to the Prince Ding mansion, she didn't hesitate to agree. Sometimes she even thought that as long as she didn't return to the northern tribes, even if she stayed in the Dechu state as a servant girl, with her ability, she wouldn't be afraid of not being able to rise up one day. But if she returned to the northern tribes, what awaited her was only the word death. Don't have any bad ideas. The Helian family raised you for so many years, you can't be wasted, right? Glancing at the silent Helian Huimin, Yilu Yi lightly said, don't worry, there aren't many people who have seen you. Princess Ronghua also hasn't seen you. As for your name, it's fine as long as you change it. In any case, uncle has more than one goddaughter. Since you can't deal with Prince Ding, then obediently accept your fate and go to the crown prince's mansion. I already gave you a chance. Helian Huimin's heart trembled. She knew Yilu Ye's methods. She hurriedly said with a trembling voice, "I understand." Yi sized her up before nodding in satisfaction and turning to leave. If it wasn't for the fact that Helian Huimin had the best aptitude among the women in Uncle's mansion, she wouldn't have needed to go back alive if this plan failed. However, although Helian Huimin was smart, compared to Princess Ding, she was still far from enough. Thinking of the information collected these days in the Chu capital, this Princess Ding not only came from a noble background, but was also skilled in literature and martial arts. It was even said that in Yongzhou, she led the Black Cloud Cavalry to guard the city until Prince Ding's reinforcements arrived. It could be said that her contributions couldn't go unnoticed. A woman who could be betrothed to the Black Cloud Cavalry. The betrothal between the northern tribes and the Ding King's mansion was left unsettled. However, the Ding King's consort's reputation as a fierce woman spread throughout the capital overnight. She dared to hold a dagger in front of the Empress Dowager and say that she wanted to enter the Ding King's mansion. If one came, she would kill one. If two came, she would kill a pair. No one in the capital dared to provoke this woman. What was even more frightening was that Prince Ding didn't have the slightest bit of anger towards the princess consort's announcement. Instead, he would occasionally accompany his beloved wife to tour the capital. That affectionate appearance clearly told people that if the women who wanted to enter the mansion as concubines were really killed by Princess Ding, His Highness Prince Ding would definitely not stand up for them. For a moment, Prince Ding said that Prince Ding loved his wife like his life. There were also people who were henpecked. However, no matter how the rumors spread outside, it still didn't affect the two people involved in this matter. At this time, Yili didn't have the time to care about these rumors. When the full moon rose into the night sky, Yili's heart that had been hanging tightened even more. Chapter 291. Not long after dinner, Mo Xiaoyao's face gradually became ugly. Yili quickly asked Shenyang to come over. Shenyang was silent for a long time and only said one word, endure. The side effects of using the phoenix tail grass were incurable and could only be endured by himself. Li, go rest in the side hall. Seeing Yi Li's stiff face, Mo Xiaoyao said softly. It would not look good when it flared up. He did not want to be too embarrassed in front of her and did not want to scare her. Yi Li calmly sat by his side and firmly said, I'll accompany you, don't be afraid. Don't be afraid. Mo Xiaoyao could not help but want to laugh, but his heart wanted to cry even more. 8 or 9 years, countless times he was on the brink of death. Countless times he was in so much pain that he could not find a reason to continue living. No one had ever asked him if he was afraid or not. No matter how powerful the Dingwa prince was, he was only a person. Moreover, when he was injured, he was only an 18-year-old youth. Of course he was afraid. Every time the cold poison flared up, he was afraid that he would never wake up again. He was afraid that the Dingwa household would be destroyed. He was afraid that no one would be able to avenge his brother, his own, and the tens of thousands of Mahist army soldiers. But he could not show his fear in front of anyone. He could only endure. But now, his Li, his wife, was sitting by his side and telling him not to be afraid. Okay, don't be afraid. Holding Yi Li's hand, Mo Xiaoyao said with a faint smile. Yi Li almost did not want to think about how this day and night passed. In the beginning, Mo Xiaoyao's pain was still bearable. She sat by his side and talked to him to distract him. But after midnight, the pain suddenly intensified. Even a tough person like Mo Xiaoyao was in so much pain that his entire body was trembling. He could not even speak a complete sentence. Any pain-killing drugs or acupuncture needles would be completely ineffective. Yi Li could only watch as he tore the brocade quilt on the bed and pulled down the brocade canopy on the bed due to the intense pain. Yi Li finally couldn't hold back her tears when she saw the usually calm and elegant man's painful and fragile appearance. She had never hated her own powerlessness so much. She vowed that she would accompany him through this pain, but in fact, there was nothing she could do except watch him and prevent him from seriously injuring himself. In just one short night, Yi Li finally understood what it meant to drag on like a year. When Imo Xiaoyao fainted from the prolonged pain, she could only carefully let him lean on her body. She didn't even dare to touch him. He could only hope that he would have a short break before the next wave of pain hit him. As expected, less than an hour later, Imo Xiaoyao woke up. What followed was an even more intense pain than before. This repeated fainting and waking up from pain and then fainting continued until noon the next day before it gradually subsided. When Chief Steward Imo and Shenyang opened the door after noon, they saw the mess in the room. Wang Fei was sitting on the ground next to the bed, her back leaning against the bed as she slept with an exhausted expression. In front of Wang Fei, the prince's head was resting on Wang Fei's lap. Even though he was not sleeping well, it could be seen that he had already fallen asleep. The wounds on his body and hands had already been treated. Seeing this scene, the two men who were almost 100 years old together couldn't help but sigh sadly. Shenyang waved his hand and left the room with Chief Steward Imo. Having just experienced a full moon, Imo Xiaoyao was once again lying on the bed. This caused Yi Li, who was already worried about Imo Xiaoyao's health, to feel even heavier in Yi Li's heart. "Li, what are you thinking about?" Imo Xiaoyao lay on the bed and smiled as he looked at Yi Li, who was holding a book in a daze. Yi Li raised her head to look at him and said with a frown, "Can your body travel thousands of miles to the Northern Militant Army?" Imo Xiaoyao smiled, "It's only one night a month. It's much better than before. If it was like last year, I'm afraid it really wouldn't work. Right now, my body is no different from a normal person's." "Why can't it?" Yi Li shook her head. This time, she had been by Imo Xiaoyao's side the entire time. The process had been shocking to her. That kind of heart-wrenching pain was something that even someone like her who had undergone professional torture training would not be able to endure. Furthermore, Imo Xiaoyao's body was not good to begin with. What was even more frightening was that he had to endure this kind of pain once a month. Just this kind of psychological shadow was enough to drive a person crazy. Looking at Yi Li's worried and distressed expression, Imo Xiaoyao smiled faintly. He reached out and pulled Yi Li to his side and laughed softly. "I once thought that I would never be able to get up in this lifetime. But look at me now. Aren't I fine? So what if I have to suffer this pain once a month? I think it's worth it. Li, I hope that your husband is perfect. Only then can he be worthy of my Li." Imo Xiaoyao murmured as his slender fingers touched Yi Li's beautiful lips. Yi Li turned her head away, not allowing herself to look at the wounds on his hand that had not yet healed. She held back the tears in her eyes and said, "Even if your leg can never recover, I will not despise you." Compared to those so-called healthy young talents, Yi Li could confidently say that Imo Xiaoyao was much more outstanding than any of them. She had never thought that Imo Xiaoyao had to do anything to be worthy of her. "I know, but I hope that Li has the best," Imo Xiaoyao said with a gentle smile. Yi Li was taken aback. She couldn't help but tear up. "What if you spoil her?" Imo Xiaoyao trapped her in his arms. "As long as Li wants it, as long as Xiaoyao has it, I can give it to you. Even if I don't steal it, I will steal it for you." The storm of the betrothal was forgotten by the Ding King's Fu and the Northern Militants' embassy. The capital was still bustling and busy as usual. It was just that there was an additional name of the Ding country's Wang Fei. Although the noblewomen secretly discussed with contempt and ridicule, who could deny that there was more envy and jealousy? Yi Li did not pay attention to the outside world. Every day, she just took care of the affairs of the Ding King's Fu as usual. When she had time, she would secretly go out of the city to see the people in training. In the blink of an eye, it was already the day for the princess to set off. The day before the departure, the husband and wife who were about to separate did not have time to be alone together. The secret study of the Ding King's Fu was rarely full of people. When Imo Xiaoyao stepped into the study with Yi Li, everyone was slightly taken aback before they hurriedly stood up to greet. Imo Xiaoyao waved his hand and said, "There's no need for unnecessary formalities. Li, you know most of these people. You can also meet the rest." Yi Li calmly sat beside Imo Xiaoyao and nodded with a smile. Looking around, she was familiar with the people present such as Chief Steward Imo, Feng San, Ling Haoyu and a few others. There were a few others that she did not recognize. She turned her head to look at Imo Xiaoyao in confusion. Imo Xiaoyao said with a faint smile, "This is General Zhang Qilan. He is in charge of the Mahist army near the capital. This is Sun Yan. He is the commander of the Black Cloud Cavalry. Imo Hua." Imo Xiaoyao introduced the two middle-aged men who looked extraordinary and called out a name in a low voice. A gray-clothed man suddenly jumped down from the beam and respectfully bowed his head, "Prince Ding, Princess." Imo Xiaoyao looked at Yi Li and smiled, "This is Imo Hua, the commander of the Shadow Guard." Yi Li nodded and smiled at the three people. These three people were the trusted aides who controlled the true power of the Ding King's Fu. Especially Imo Hua. After entering the Prince Ding mansion for more than a year, Yi Li naturally knew that those surnamed Imo in the Ding King's Fu were the most trusted people of Imo Xiaoyao. They were people who had been loyal to the Ding King's Fu for generations when Imo Xiaoyao was still alive. Chapter 292. Zhang Qilan and Sun Yan quickly stood up and said, "This subordinate greets Princess." Yi Li smiled and said, "We are all on the same side, there is no need for the two generals to be so courteous." Feng Xiao and Ling Haoyu, who were sitting at the side, looked at each other and saw a trace of surprise and affirmation in each other's eyes. After everyone sat down again, Imo Hua turned invisible and disappeared from the study room. Yi Li looked at a certain shadow in the study room and smiled faintly. Imo Hua had a faint dissatisfaction or unwillingness to accept her, but this was not a problem that needed to be solved now. "Prince, the northern militant kingdom is far away and it will take a few months to reach there. Isn't it inappropriate for the prince to go alone?" Zhang Qilan was a soldier and was a straightforward person. He said whatever was on his mind. The others nodded their heads, although they knew that the decision could not be changed. Sun Yan suggested, "Prince, should we ask the emperor to allow the Mahist army and the Black Cloud Cavalry to escort the princess and prince to the northern militant kingdom?" Everyone present agreed. The northern militant kingdom and the Ding kingdom had a blood feud. They would not be at ease if the prince went to the northern militant kingdom alone. Imo Xiaoyao smiled faintly and said, "The emperor will not agree. Not to mention the emperor, even the northern militant kingdom will not agree. Sending the Mahist army and the Black Cloud Cavalry to escort the political marriage team might not even be able to enter the borders of the northern militant kingdom. The northern militant kingdom's enmity towards the Mahist army was not lower than the Mahist army towards the northern militant kingdom." Ling Haoyu smiled and said, "Everyone need not be too worried. I think the northern militant kingdom will not have the guts to directly attack the prince. The Mahist army and the Black Cloud Cavalry will definitely not be able to go, but no one will say anything if we bring a few shadow guards. As for how many they will bring, it was up to them to decide." The discussion in the study paused and everyone turned to look at Imo Xiaoyao. Although the Ding King's residence had been very low-key all these years, it was indeed the prince who had dragged his sickly body and single-handedly restored the Ding King's residence that was on the verge of collapse. They should believe that since the prince had promised the emperor to go to the northern tribes, he must have a plan in his heart. Imo Xiaoyao held Yi Li's hand and smiled, "Since I am heading to the northern tribes, I have a plan. What we should worry about now is what will happen in the capital after I leave." Everyone was stunned. Feng Xiao frowned and said, "Prince suspects that someone will attack the Prince Ding mansion after you leave?" Imo Xiaoyao said indifferently, "It wasn't easy for I to get away from the capital. It would be difficult for the other party to not make a move. After I leave the capital, everyone will listen to Wang Fei's orders." Everyone present was stunned. They couldn't help but look at the quiet woman sitting beside Imo Xiaoyao. Although they admired Wang Fei's performance in the past year, for a 16-year-old woman to control the entire Ding King's residence, people still doubted her ability. Sun Yan frowned and said, "Prince, you mean?" Imo Xiaoyao didn't immediately answer his question. Instead, he looked at Yi Li and smiled, "Li, is the jade pendant I gave you a few days ago still with you?" Yi Li was stunned. She then remembered what Imo Xiaoyao was referring to. Lowering her head, she took out a jade pendant from her sleeve and opened it. Everyone looked at it and couldn't help but gasp. In Yili's palm was a piece of high-quality mutton fat white jade. That jade wasn't suitable for a woman to use, so Yili usually kept it with her and didn't wear it. On the jade pendant, there was a lifelike Yazi carved on it. Yazi, the second son of the dragon, with the head of a dragon and the body of a wolf. Its personality was strong, brave, good at fighting, and bloodthirsty. However, this was the true commander's seal of the Ding King's residence. The Mahist army and the Black Cloud cavalry were the same. They didn't have a common commander seal. Of all the armies, only Prince Ding could move at will. However, there was one exception. That was the Ding country Wang Fei, who held the Yazi jade pendant. Her power was no different than Prince Ding himself. Because of this, the world always thought that Princess Ding could also move the Mahist army and the Black Cloud cavalry. In reality, there were only one or two Princess Ding who had this power. The reason was that the other Princess Ding didn't have this jade pendant. Prince Wang Fei is too young. Is it? Zhang Qilan said worriedly. The other people didn't speak, but the same thought was written on their faces. Wang Fei did have outstanding abilities. If she could train for a few years, she might be able to hold her own. However, the current Wang Fei, you are only 16 years old. You have only been in the residence for a year. It really made people worried. Feng Zhiyao stood up with a smile. He bowed to Yili and said, Feng Zhiyao will follow Prince's orders. I will listen to Wang Fei's orders. Leng Haoyu raised an eyebrow slightly. He followed Feng Zhiyao and said, I will follow Wang Fei's orders. Feng San, Ling you. Zhang Qilan stared anxiously at the two young people who didn't know the severity of the situation. Feng Zhiyao leisurely fanned himself and said with a smile, General Zhang worries too much. Wang Fei's literary and military skills are extraordinary. This year, in Yonglin City, she only used 20 to 30,000 soldiers to stop King Li's army of 100,000. She also killed tens of thousands of enemies and even completely destroyed King Li's two flanking armies. Who dares to say that Wang Fei doesn't know the art of war? Zhang Qilan stilled. He naturally heard about Wang Fei defending Yongzhou. However, he didn't take it seriously. After all, Murong was still in Yongzhou and Wang Fei was just a woman. Since ancient times, there was no precedent of a woman on the battlefield. He only thought that Wang Fei and the Black Cloud cavalry were in Yonglin, so she ordered the Black Cloud cavalry to help defend the city. However, it was completely different when he heard Feng Zhiyao say it personally. Feng Zhiyao had been in charge of the Shadow Guard for many years. It was impossible for him to speak carelessly. The generals who led the troops looked at Yili with a trace of inquiry. They were usually in the barracks and didn't have much interaction with Yili, and naturally, they didn't know as much as Feng Zhiyao, Ling Haoyu, and the others. At this moment, when they heard Feng Zhiyao's words, they started to doubt whether Prince's decision was too abrupt. Yili put away the jade pendant again. She raised her head and smiled at the generals. This consort is young and inexperienced. In the future, please give me more pointers. Her tone was light and calm as usual, but the generals could acutely feel the sharpness and murderous intent. Those who hadn't been on the battlefield wouldn't have such an aura. This young Wang Fei could even completely restrain this murderous aura. If she didn't do it on purpose, others wouldn't be able to feel it at all. It was as if the woman in front of them was as harmless as they saw her. The generals' hearts trembled and they all lowered their heads. We will obey Wang Fei's orders. Mo Xiaoyao looked at the crowd with satisfaction and nodded, very good. After I leave the capital, everything in the Ding King's Fu will be decided by Wang Fei. Wang Fei's words are I's meaning. Do you understand? This subordinate understands. The crowd said in unison. The secret conversation in the study continued until late at night. After sending everyone off, the two walked out of the study hand in hand and saw a crescent moon in the sky. Yili raised her head to look at the handsome man beside her. Her heart couldn't help but move. A feeling of reluctance spread in her heart. Li, what is it? Mo Xiaoyao asked in a light voice. Yi Li shook her head and shook off the gloom in her heart. I'm worried about you going to the northern tribes. I've picked a few people for you to take with you to the northern tribes. Chapter 293. Mo Xiaoyao smiled and asked curiously, what kind of people can make Miss Li feel so assured? Is there some kind of genius that I don't know about? Yi Li sighed softly and said, if possible, I don't want to give them to you, because they haven't finished their training and tests. But this time, the Emperor definitely won't let you bring too many people from the Prince Ding mansion. The number of guards you have is limited. It's better to bring them along. Mo Xiaoyao smiled and said, since Miss Li is so confident, then I also want to see the results of Miss Li in the past month. Yi Li smiled faintly and raised her hand to tap lightly twice. Mo Xiaoyao looked around attentively. His eyes flashed and he said loudly, Shadow Guard, alert. In the night, after a few light sounds, everything returned to silence. Not long after, several figures landed from the trees, from the walls, and from the eaves. They quickly formed a line and said in a low voice, Gongzi, please instruct us. Yi Li raised her eyebrows in surprise and said with a smile, to be able to recognize me, it seems that Lin Han and the others have taught me well. Prince, how is it? Mo Xiaoyao shook his head helplessly and said, it seems that the Shadow Guard needs to be trained again. These people didn't seem to be very skilled in martial arts, but they were able to silently sneak into the heavily guarded Prince Ding mansion and defeat enemies twice their size. It had to be said that their abilities were shocking. Perhaps the Shadow Guard of the Prince Ding mansion had been too arrogant these past few years. Yi Li smiled and said, Prince, there's no need to feel depressed. They were able to sneak in because they knew about the guards of the mansion. The guards of the Prince Ding mansion didn't have too many loopholes. Mo Xiaoyao said, Li doesn't need to comfort I won't blame them. Where are the guards in the courtyard? A moment later, a dozen shadow guards walked in with their faces covered in dirt. Among them, the shadow guards were so ashamed that they did not dare to raise their heads. They boasted that they were the most powerful guards in the Ding King's residence, but they were caught unprepared under their watch without a sound. If it was really a sneak attack by the enemy, and something happened to the prince and princess consort, even 10,000 deaths would not be enough to atone for their crimes. Mo Xiaoyao looked curiously at the 8 people standing in front of him. He felt that these people were completely different from the Mahist army's Black Cloud Cavalry and the Shadow Guard. But he knew that these people were truly chosen from these 3 troops. In less than 2 months, they were able to change so much. It had to be said that his beloved consort really knew how to train people. Li, they shouldn't only know how to sneak attack, right? Yi Li raised her head and said proudly, of course not. Without using any internal energy, just in terms of close combat, each of them can easily fight against 15 elite soldiers. Each of them can skillfully use all kinds of weapons. No matter if it is one-on-one, group attack, night battle, water battle, assassination, ambush, night attack, it is not a problem. As for what else they know, you can tell it to the prince. The soldiers standing in a line started from the first one. Reporting to the prince, this subordinate was originally from the Mahist army. I am good at assassination and ambush. This subordinate also knows the northern tribes and southern Zhao languages. This subordinate was originally from the Black Cloud Cavalry. I am good at archery and close combat. This subordinate was originally from the Shadow Guard. I am good at disguise, qinggong, and poison. After listening to their reports, even Mo Xiaoyao could not help but sigh in admiration. Li is truly amazing. Are these people really for me? Yi Li glanced at him and said unhappily, otherwise, could it be that I took them out to make you jealous? After saying this, she did not care about Mo Xiaoyao's reaction. She looked at the people in the courtyard and said, you are the most outstanding soldiers in the first batch of training. Almost all of you have completed the training ahead of time. Originally, you had a month to learn more skills and then take the test. But now you have to carry out the mission ahead of time. I am very sorry. The leader of the soldiers said, "It is our honor to serve the prince and princess." "Princess, please give the order." Yi Li nodded and said, "Very good. From today onwards, you will be the prince's personal bodyguards until the prince returns from the northern tribes. So, your first mission will be to protect him. The goal is to see the prince return to the capital in one piece. Can you do it?" "Yes, we swear to complete the mission," everyone said in unison. Yi Li smiled and said, "Very good. This is not only a mission, but also a test for you. Because it is your first mission, I will send Lin Han to accompany you. He is not only your leader, but also the person who will test you. Everyone, have a safe journey." "Thank you, young master." Outside the palace, Princess Ronghua was wearing a red wedding dress with a phoenix and a peony. She tearfully said goodbye to the Empress Dowager and the Emperor Empress. Princess Zhaoran, who used to be arrogant, finally could not help but cry in the face of her only daughter marrying to the northern tribes. She looked at her daughter who was about to leave but could not say anything. Now it was the Empress Dowager and the Emperor and the Empress who came to send off the princess. Even if she was the biological mother, she could not hold Princess Ronghua back. Princess Ronghua said goodbye to the Empress Dowager, the Emperor, the Empress and her parents one by one. She was supported by the palace maid who accompanied her to the carriage. When she was about to get on the carriage, she looked back in the direction of Yi Li. Yi Li nodded gently and smiled at her. Princess Ronghua looked down and smiled faintly. She resolutely turned and stepped into the carriage. On the luxuriously decorated carriage, the peony curtain embroidered with the noble status of the princess fell gently, covering Princess Ronghua's beautiful face and figure. From now on, she would live in a foreign country as the princess of Dechu state. Perhaps she would never see her parents again. "Li Li, I am leaving. Be careful in the capital." Standing beside Yi Li, Mo Xiaoyao whispered softly. Yi Li looked up at the elegant man in a dark green robe embroidered with a silver dragon. She nodded gently and said, "I know. You be careful too. Come back early." Mo Xiaoyao nodded. "I will be careful." Li Li is alone in the capital. Yi Li interrupted him and said firmly, "I will guard the Prince Sting mansion well and wait for you to come back." Mo Xiaoyao stilled and said in a low voice, "As long as Li Li is safe, Xiaoyao will be very happy." The attendant on the side carefully came over to urge them to leave. He muttered in his heart that it was said that Prince Sting and Wang Fei had a good relationship. Now it seemed that they were inseparable. Yi Li took a step back and left Mo Xiaoyao's arms. She tilted her head and said to Lin Han standing on the side, "Lin Han, the prince's safety is in your hands." Lin Han nodded and said seriously, "Wang Fei, please do not worry. This subordinate will not betray Wang Fei's trust." Yi Li nodded and said goodbye to Mo Xiaoyao before retreating into the crowd. Mo Xiaoyao turned back to look at her. He led the white horse beside him and mounted it to catch up with the procession that had already left. When the entire procession had disappeared into the distance, Princess Zhaoran finally fell to the ground in tears. Zhaoyang Princess ordered people to help her back to the Princess Fu. The Emperor and Empress also accompanied the Empress Dowager back to the palace. The noisy palace gates instantly became much quieter. Yi Li stood where she was and looked in the direction that Mo Xiaoyao had left in. She was silent. "Wang Fei, Prince Ding has already left the city. We should return." Chief Steward Mo walked in front of Yi Li and said in a low voice. Yi Li nodded and said, "Let's return." Mo Xiaoyao's sudden absence in Jing seemed to be lonely and bored. Chapter 294. After Prince Ding left the capital, the Ding King's residence closed its doors and declined all visitors as usual. However, only the people in the Ding King's residence knew. In just a short span of 10 days, the number of secret attacks on the Ding King's residence was several times more than the past few years. In the middle of the night, another wave of attacks ended. Yi sat on the chair placed under the eaves and looked indifferently at the men in black who were kneeling on the ground in the courtyard with a solemn expression. On her left and right stood Zhuo Jing, Qin Feng, Chief Steward Mo, Feng Xiao, Mo Hua, Zhang Qilan and Han Mingxi, who were specially stationed in the residence because Prince Ding had left the capital. Other than Feng Xiao, who was smiling as usual, the rest had an ugly expression on their faces. Tonight, the assassins actually broke through the outer perimeter of the Ding King's residence and almost barged into the main courtyard where Yi lived. As the leader of the Shadow Guards, Mo Hua's expression was even uglier. This was simply a slap to the Shadow Guard's face. "Alright, tell me, where did these people come from?" Yi looked at her subordinates' gloomy expressions and asked indifferently. The assassins who were forced to kneel in the courtyard had a flash of disdain in their eyes as they arrogantly tilted their heads to one side. Yi laughed in spite of herself. "It was my slip of the tongue. If I don't ask properly, I don't think you will confess. However, it just so happens that, in these 10 days, there were a total of 7 waves of people who came here. Among them, there might be some of your companions. However, there isn't anyone who is strong enough to go against me. Qin Feng, I'll leave it to you." Qin Feng laughed loudly. "Many thanks to Princess. It just so happens that my subordinates are learning how to interrogate. These few days, they have improved tremendously. I still have to thank so many people for their contributions." Feng Xiao, who was standing by the side, sneered and pretended to be disdainful, but his eyes were already looking at Qin Feng. "This young master requests to be a spectator." He, Feng Xiao, was known as the most powerful interrogation expert in the Ding King's residence. However, ever since Qin Feng brought back those few brats, he then realized what was called "there was always someone better than you." Moreover, these interrogation experts were mass-produced. Qin Feng looked at him with a fake smile and said, "This is a secret. Outsiders are not allowed to enter." With a wave of his hand, someone came over and stopped the people in the courtyard. Feng Xiao glared resentfully at Qin Feng, who had left in a carefree manner. Then, he turned around and looked at Yi eagerly. There was no other way. Ever since Qin Feng followed Wang Fei, no one could speak in front of him except for the prince and Wang Fei. Yi faintly smiled and said, "Feng-san, Qin Feng didn't deliberately make things difficult for you. This is really confidential." Feng Xiao harumphed and said, "It's just an interrogation. Even if they have some unique methods, it can't be considered a secret." Yi smiled and said, "The interrogator is still a secret for now." Feng-san rubbed his nose and didn't speak. He was one of Mo Xiaoyao's most trusted people. Naturally, he knew that Wang Fei had a secret troop of people selected from the various armies of the Ding Wangfu. No one knew what Wang Fei wanted these people to do. Even the prince didn't know what happened to these people after they were selected by Wang Fei. Now, was it these people? Feng Xiao thought of the people that Qin Feng had brought back a few days ago to be interrogated. He had only taken a hurried glance. There didn't seem to be anything out of the ordinary. However, Feng Xiao's wariness that had been cultivated after so many years on the battlefield and in secret made him feel that these people weren't simple. Yi stood and smiled to the crowd. "It has been hard on everyone tonight. Let's go sit in the study." Zhang Qilan's expression was ugly as he said, "The prince just left and these people made a move against the Prince Ding mansion. Are we just going to let it go like this?" Yi faintly smiled and said, "General Zhang, don't worry. Naturally, we won't let it go like this. Ben Fei just happens to need some people to practice." Her gentle tone brought out a chilling murderous intent. Everyone couldn't help but be solemn as they followed Yi to the study room. When they returned to the study and sat down, Yi said to Han Mingxi sitting on the side, "It's time to take care of Xiling and Nanjiang. Mingxi, leave Jing tomorrow." Hearing this, Han Mingxi frowned and wanted to say something. Yi shook her head and said, "No need to say more. You have seen the situation in Jing. There's nothing for you to do here. It's better to leave early. Dagu should still be in Yongzhou right now. If there's anything you can't decide, you can take my token to ask him." Han Mingxi looked coolly at her and sighed softly, I know. I will leave tomorrow. I'm going back to pack first. Yili didn't keep him and just nodded. When Han Mingxi left, the atmosphere in the study immediately warmed up. It wasn't that the people of the Prince Ding mansion didn't trust Han Mingxi and were wary of him, but these people were all born with a pair of astute eyes that could see through the world. Han Mingxi's thoughts were hidden but could not be hidden from these people. But these people were also very loyal to Mo Xiaoyao. Even if there was nothing between Wang Fei and Han Mingxi, in the eyes of these loyal officials of the Prince Ding mansion, they couldn't help but be colder to Han Mingxi. Yili acted as if she didn't see the expressions on everyone's faces as she continued to talk about what happened in the prince's mansion. Everyone was worried about the safety of the Prince Ding mansion. Chief Steward Mo asked, Wang Fei, should we send more shadow guard into the Fu? These days, the Prince Ding mansion had been attacked continuously. The guards and shadow guard were probably exhausted. Today, assassins had even broken into Wang Fei's residence. Yili smiled and said, there's no need to be so troublesome. They worked so hard to sneak into Jing and even risked their lives to break into the Ding Wang Fu that the world knows is impregnable. We have to see what they want to do. Starting tomorrow, catch fewer assassins. Let a few go back. Feng Zhiao's eyes flashed and he said with a smile, Wang Fei wants to let people know that the Ding Wang Fu's defenses are gradually weakened. Will the other side believe it? Yili smiled and said, since they know they can't break in but still come wave after wave, this Fei will give them a chance. If it was you, would you believe it? Zhang Qilan said worriedly, if this news spreads out, the Wang Fu will be even more unsettled. Yili smiled coldly and said faintly, this Fei will let the world know that the Ding Wang Fu is not only impregnable, it is also a hell on earth with no return. Everyone's heart shook as they stared blankly at the gentle and beautiful green-clothed woman in front of them. They were speechless for a long time. Wang Fei. Qin Feng pushed the door open and entered with a strange expression. Yili raised her eyebrows and asked without surprise, you didn't get anything out of them? Qin Feng said with slight anger, one committed suicide and the rest are just small fries. They don't know anything. Yili shook her head and said, that's not right. The one who died was not the leader. Qin Feng looked at Yili in confusion. Yili said faintly, it's impossible for the other party to not know how powerful the interrogation at the Prince Ding mansion is. If they really wanted to die, they would have killed themselves when they were caught. In terms of experience, you are not as good as Feng San. Feng Zhiao looked at Qin Feng proudly and said with a smile, that's right. At least in this young master's hands, there will never be a case of a prisoner committing suicide. At this time, Qin Feng did not care about Feng Zhiao's provocation. His sword-like eyebrows were tightly knitted as he said, Princess Consort means that the one who committed suicide was just a cover for the real leader? Yili held her chin and said, there is at least a 50% chance. Of course, it is also possible that he was frightened by your methods and coincidentally fell into the hands of a few inexperienced rookies and took advantage of the opportunity to commit suicide. But, your methods should not have reached that stage, right?